Welcome to the FITSNews studios for a special edition of the Year in Review. You've seen the week in review. You've seen the month in review. We're going hard today. Year in review on New Year's Eve 2025. It's been a wild year at FITSNews, a wild year in our world. Before we get started, though, a couple quick thank yous. I got to send a shout out to the best news team in the business. I'm talking about Jen Wood, our research director, who's going to be on the show tonight. Andy Fancher, our lead investigative reporter, who's coming in with the flu. Commitment, folks. Dylan Nolan running the board behind the scenes. He's going to step out in front of the camera too later tonight. But a killer team that has been busting ass all year to bring you the truth behind the headlines, to bring you the real narratives underlying the stories you're fed by the mainstream media, to bring you the truth. We got a huge show. So many stories this past year that we've covered, stories we broke, stories we've driven. But we want to start with a story that really goes back to sort of what put FITSNews on the map several years ago. I'm referring, of course, to the saga of Alec Murdaugh, the convicted killer, the confessed fraudster, the disgraced, disbarred former attorney solicitor from the Lowcountry who came from a family which wielded dictatorial control over a 5-county region in the South Carolina Lowcountry for nearly a century. Now, FITSNews exclusively reported on a double homicide that was at the heart of this story back in the summer of 2021. And then in the winter of 2023, we reported on the trial of the century in Walterboro, South Carolina, where Murdaugh was convicted of murdering his wife and younger son. But since then, the story, the official narrative of those convictions has come under significant scrutiny. And I'm joined now by Jen Wood. We're going to talk about what's going to be a big year in this case, starting in February, with a hearing before the South Carolina Supreme Court on Murdaugh's appeal. Now, even before the final written arguments were filed in this case, Jen, you were on this story from the beginning. You were tracking the arguments, looking at sort of the cases that were going to come into play. Set the stage for our audience on the Alec Murdaugh appeal that's coming before the Supreme Court in February.
So this appeal is going to be heard by the Supreme Court on February 11th, and we will be covering that live. As well as we will be in the courtroom. I'm very, very anxious to hear these oral arguments. But yeah, I mean, we are looking at allegations of jury tampering. We're also looking at evidentiary issues that Murdaugh's defense has brought to the Supreme Court. I mean, the jury tampering is the big one. But I do think some of those other arguments that they raised on appeal are also big deals.
Well, let's talk about those because we're going to dig deep here into the jury tampering in a second. But before we get there, let's talk about some of the other arguments that formed the basis of Alec Murdaugh's appeal. What are his attorneys saying was unfair about the trial other than the jury tampering?
So Judge Clifton Newman, beloved Judge Clifton Newman, everybody fell in love with him during the trial. I mean, his, bragging the jury. I mean, he was just a delight to be in his courtroom and watch him preside over.
He is. I saw him at a Christmas party just a couple of weeks ago. He's awesome.
Yeah, he's a great
Everybody
guy.
loves the guy.
But one of the things Murdaugh's attorneys are arguing is that allowing the evidence regarding his financial crimes in should not have happened. And that trial was 6 weeks long. And that is because there was a trial within the trial as Judge Newman listened to a lot of the testimony outside of the presence of the jury to determine whether or not he was going to let that evidence in. And he ultimately did let the evidence in. Now, whether or not that would have made a difference with the jury, I don't know. But I do know we've spoken to a lot of attorneys that are concerned that sets a precedent. So that, I mean, I am anxious to hear what they say about that in their opinion. There are the phone hooking guy.
Yeah. And that's critical because the guy we're talking about, of course, is the prosecution expert who testified to throwing a phone on the ground to sort of see when it would turn on and off.
Right.
But the prosecution's version of events, that set their entire timeline.
It did.
The crime. So it's critical evidence.
It is critical evidence, and it was done at the last minute. This man is not a forensic expert in phone throwing.
Who is?
I mean, it was. It had us throwing our phone around around
Trying to get the
the
light to come on and
RV,
off, right?
right, just to see what would happen. But yeah, if that evidence hadn't, I mean, that evidence does throw their entire timeline off.
Well, and also let's talk a little bit about that timeline, because you have uncovered much in the aftermath of this trial, Jen Wood, that was not included in the timeline provided to jurors, to the press, the official timeline.
Right.
You've uncovered things, text messages, phone calls, other entries that were not part of that, which in fact, Alec Murdaugh's attorneys have said, hey, if we knew about some of these things, it would have impacted our decision on which witnesses to call, including one witness we're going to talk about here in a bit, cousin Eddie Smith, the check casher, drug dealer who is
roadside shooting.
yeah, guy who shot Alec Murdaugh in the head.
Yeah, and I think, you know, a lot of that. So the prosecution presented a timeline to the jury, and that timeline presentation, I remember we are all very anxious to hear SLED agent David Owen, who is the lead agent on this homicide investigation, testify, and that did not go well for the prosecution.
That's right.
There were a lot of issues with this testimony. We will get into more David Owen issues when we talk about, yeah, right. Yeah. But it's when the SLED agent Peter Wadowski came to the stand and presented that timeline that I think it kind of switched back in the prosecution's favor. But that timeline was compiled and presented to the jury. And I can't say how, but I got a hold of all of the text messages and phone calls that were sent to and from Alex's phone, as well as Paul and Maggie's. I mean, we are talking pages and pages of data. But some of those text messages were not presented to the jury.
Why not?
It's a good question. I mean, he was meeting up with Eddie Smith the day after the murders. Depending on how you read those texts, it looked like potentially there was some sort of drug buy that was happening.
Oh, wow.
But I mean, they
were up to something,
right? There's something was going on the day after those murders, and the jury never saw that. There's also some more data that I mean, so there's so much of it, but yeah, I mean, there will be more coming out about that timeline.
Well, and this information has also prompted you to dig back into some of the things that we started to report on in the fall of 2021, which were Alec Murdaugh's connections to bigger drug enterprises. I mean, we've all heard about the pills, the oxy, but that's just part of it. This guy was part of something bigger, and we were very close to zeroing in on that broader network. But some of these communications have got us digging back into that. We've been looking at a number of other connections in the aftermath of this trial that tie him to a broader drug network. Jen, thinking about that part of the story, if Alec Murdaugh was mixed up in something bigger, a drug enterprise that went beyond handing out a few oxys to fellow lawyers, which is what the prosecution has tried to play it as, if he was part of a bigger drug deal, a drug enterprise, doesn't that shed a whole new light on this crime and this entire process?
Heck yeah, it does. And you say if, there's no if.
Wow.
There's absolutely no if to that. After, I mean, so those are files that I go through. Like, I'm going back through all of that research I did in the fall of 2021 and looking at them again, and the names are making more sense.
Oh, wow.
The locations are making more sense, and we have additional information that's been provided to us that ties it together even more.
Well, we're going to dig into some of that in a minute when we talk about some of the big interviews we conducted this year, including one with Blanca Simpson, the Murdaugh housekeeper, who obviously knows a lot more than she has said. She's got a book that came out that we went to interview her about, and she made some explosive revelations in the interview where we sat down with her. But before we get to that, I want to go back to the appeal, because that's what's going to be the big story. The first part of 2026 is, what does the Supreme Court do with Alec Murdaugh's request for a new trial?
Right.
And if they don't give it to him, what do the feds do? Because he's got a hell of a case in the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals federally if the state doesn't give him a new trial. So he's got two bites at this apple, Jen, that we got to keep a track of. But before we get to that, I wanted to ask you about the outcome. And I say this with quotes, the resolution of the jury tampering matter. Because when we talk about this show and the theme of this show, I think our Andy Fancher said it best. It's the year of inconclusive conclusions.
Right.
You know, it's a year where things seem to be resolved, yet the more we dig into them, the less resolved they become. So let's talk about this jury tampering thing, because if I remember correctly, we were sitting in a courtroom in Richland County, South Carolina in January of 2024, now nearly 2 years ago, where we heard multiple jurors from Alec Murdaugh's jury testify that they overheard the clerk of court saying things about Murdaugh's testimony, saying things about what to watch for. One of those jurors even said on the record in open court that influenced her decision. Now, that to me would be definitional, documented, proven jury tampering.
Right.
And in fact, you and I know from the research we've done and the interviews we've conducted and allegations leveled by juror Myra Crosby, could have been even worse than that. Could have been actual jury rigging. But we know at the very minimum there was tampering. Yet this year, just a few weeks ago, as a matter of fact, Becky Hill, the clerk of court, accused of tampering, accused of being part of the rigging of the jury. She was allowed to plead to some charges unrelated to that, in which everyone associated with the drama stated for the record, oh, well, there's no tampering. Tell us a little bit about what happened with Becky Hill and the resolution of that.
So she was charged in, May? Was it May? Gosh, the months are all yelling together. So she was charged with obstruction of justice, misconduct in office, and perjury. What she was not charged with criminally was jury tampering, despite all of that testimony.
Yeah, did we imagine that? Was that a dream? I think we got video of it.
So those were the charges. She, I think on a Friday, we got notification that there was going to be a hearing on Monday regarding Becky. No indication what that hearing was going to be. I had a feeling it was going to be plea. So we went down there, and sure enough, it was a plea. She pled guilty to all of the counts levied against her. And in that hearing, where she pled guilty, the judge accepted her plea and sentenced her. That jury tampering came up quite frequently. I thought it was really quite interesting.
Well, we got some clips from that hearing, if I'm not mistaken. Jen, what's the first clip we're going to look at?
So the first clip we're going to listen to Becky herself talking about, she's talking to the judge about her conduct and how remorseful she is.
Let's take a listen. Becky Hill.
Your Honor, I want to say that I am truly sorry. And I do take full responsibility for my actions. And I know that I have let down this court, my community, and the people that put their trust in me. There is no excuse for my mistakes. I am ashamed of them. And I will carry that shame with me for the rest of my life.
So there's Becky Hill, remorseful, penitent, but not remorseful or penitent on jury tampering, because according to her, according to the court, that's not what they're there for.
That is, don't say jury tampering, because it didn't happen.
So let's listen to the next clip. Is from who? From her lawyer?
This is from Becky's attorney, Will Lewis, and he's talking about why they're there and why they are not there.
Well, let's listen to Becky Hill's attorney.
Should be accepting responsibility.
Searching that up, apparently.
Yeah.
Give us just a sec while
it's not for consideration for your honor. And that is not what she's accepting responsibility for. She's accepting responsibility for what she did. And it was serious crimes and serious misconduct, and that's why she's here. But when we get rid of the noise surrounding this, we actually look at the conduct in front of your honor, Your Honor, I'm a product of federal court predominantly. That's kind of how I think about these sentencing issues. And I think about the three goals of sentencing. When someone says to you, what you're doing is, specific deterrence to prevent her from reoffending, general deterrence, someone else sees this, we don't want them to do it, and then full justice for the victims. And when I look at that framework for Ms. Hill, well, there is truly no one who can come in this courtroom and say that Ms. Hill, 58-year-old grandmother, a mother, has been employed her whole life, helps almost every single day with one of her special needs grandchildren, taught herself sign language to help people, including her goddaughter, served her community, and continues to do up to today, is at any risk of reoffending. And the fact that she has agreed from day one to accept this perjury count as a felony, she's literally logically prohibited from creating misconduct in office again. She can't legally do it.
So the noise would be the jury tampering.
Yeah. And what an absolute whitewash. And that's a guy, Will Lewis, who's earned a lot of respect when he was a federal prosecutor. It's disappointing to see somebody like that kind of throw that away with this. And here's the sad thing is that, you get a guy like Will Lewis up there spinning this web, trying to frame this as, oh, it's just noise. No, it's not noise.
It's not noise.
It's documented.
Yeah.
We listened to it. We heard testimony on it. Chief Justice Toll literally questioned these jurors and they responded in the affirmative.
Multiple.
I mean, it's just unbelievable for somebody, and shame on Will Lewis for that. I mean, that's a guy that should know better. But anyway, the judge bought it. Let's listen to Judge Heath Taylor. And again, a lot of people have given Heath Taylor grief for this, but I got to say, for Heath Taylor, what's he going to do?
Right. No,
he's got the prosecutor and the defense attorney singing on the same sheet of music. So here's Judge Taylor's conclusion.
uncovered any sort of jury tampering, there would be a much different sentence here today. There's probably nothing more sacred in our system than the jury, and at their, I've known Mr. Hubbard since his hair was dark and I had his hair. So his key, and I know both the lawyers on his team, if they tell me at least they've been through it, then that's enough for me.
Jen, it's a whitewash. It's an absolute and total whitewash.
And even back to when they referred this out to Recovered, who's a great solicitor, highly respected, but the referral, even, it was not really a referral.
No, Creighton Waters was basically saying, I've still got control, but we're going to let you
right
stand up and do this, Solicitor Hubbard. But, and he said it in there, Judge Taylor, there's nothing more sacred than the jury. Well, let's act like that, South Carolina. I mean, if you've got even the specter of jury tampering, which is clear, if you've got documented evidence of it, which we have from that hearing back in January of 2024, if you've got, again, allegations of jury rigging that have been totally uninvestigated by Select. But we'll tell you what they did do. They kind of came after us a little bit this year because we were talking about this a little bit too much, apparently.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of intimidation this year against us for going after this.
Yeah. And it is. And it is straight intimidation. I mean, it pulls you back and pulls your focus back and makes you wonder, should I be doing this?
Well, we absolutely should, because
Yeah.
it pisses off all the right people.
I know.
I mean, come on. But I tell you, it should piss off citizens, because if these verdicts are legitimate, then we shouldn't worry about it. We should be, but if there are questions, legitimate questions about them, we ought to be serious about investigating those questions.
People get very caught up. Alec Murdaugh is a horrible person. He admitted to stealing from his clients, the people that trusted him, the people that needed his help and trusted him to do the right thing. He's a horrible person, and people get really caught up on that. But even the most reprehensible of humans deserves a fair trial. I can't.
Well, and not only that, but
It's ridiculous.
Here's what gets me about it is you have somebody like Alec Murdaugh who manipulated the system for years. Family probably manipulated it for decades. That was a whole theme in going after him. And one of the reasons people went after him so hard was, hey, here's this guy, privileged guy with all this power who's been abusing the system. Well, guess what? We are watching the system be
I
abused
was going to say,
right now.
it's still happening.
Right now. And we've said it so many times, and it bears repeating. This was a case South Carolina had to get right. All of the eyes of the country were on South Carolina and our judicial system. And a lot of times people would think, oh, well, it's going to be Alec Murdaugh getting off. No, we're bending the rules the other way.
Right.
We're bending the rules the other way. And I got to tell you, it just, for anybody who values their liberties, their Sixth Amendment rights, it ought to piss you off.
You call it the verdict protection racket.
Verdict protection
You're
racket.
absolutely right.
It is. And it's unfortunate because, we're sitting here talking about this, and there's, if there is a new trial, and we got to figure out, does the state retry him? I mean, he's locked up for what, 4 decades federally on the fiscal, on the financial charges.
Right. He's got his state and federal.
So he's got decades behind bars. Unlikely he would be eligible to get out before he's dead. But do they retry this case if he is granted a new trial, either by the state or by the feds?
This is a good question. I mean, the Colucci indictment, which we're going to talk about later in the show, got overturned. They have not, to my knowledge, reindicted him.
Yeah.
They have to take that case back to the grand jury and get that indictment again. And to my knowledge, that happened almost 6 months ago.
Yeah.
They've not. I mean, grand jury proceedings are secret, but we're still waiting. Will they do the same thing with Murdaugh?
And let's not forget also, we've got Alec Murdaugh's indictments on these charges were based on some probable cause that was later determined to be less than reliable.
Real questionable.
The blood spatter.
Yeah.
That was the big tip from our former employee. But at any rate, we're going to go on. It's frustrating to cover this case because you see this stuff. You see the whitewash like we just saw. You see and feel the intimidation that has come on us for digging into this. And people are always like, you worried about the drug dealers and the drug networks when you dig into this? No. Those guys actually have a little more honor than the institutions in South Carolina. These South Carolina institutions play dirtier than the damn drug dealers as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, let's talk a little bit before we get into the Blanca Simpson component of this, because that plays into a lot of these things. But let's talk real quick about Cousin Eddie. This is a guy, he's been sitting out there for 4 years now?
4.5 years.
They ever going to take this guy to trial?
It's funny because about once a month or once every other month, I check in with Eddie's attorneys and the AG's office. No movement. No
Nothing.
movement. He is he's still got his ankle monitor on. It's been 4.5 years. He's up and about,
And this is the guy who allegedly ran drugs for Alec Murdaugh, who allegedly laundered money for Alec Murdaugh, who participated in the insurance scam, shooting him over the top of the head, grazing him so that he could collect a $10 million policy. And this guy's very linked.
none of it makes sense though.
And as you pointed out, making shady calls to Murdaugh on burner lines the day after the murders.
Right.
Just crazy stuff.
And are we holding on that because they don't want? I mean, are they going to plea? Like, going to take a plea and then we're never going to know what happened? Or are they going to take it to trial? And are we holding on it because they don't want information to come out in case they have to retry Alec?
That's the problem with this whole story is nobody wants the truth.
Nobody wants the truth.
Nobody wants the truth. They've got their truth. And that's the thing you'll learn about South Carolina folks is people will dig up to a point. If they're getting good press, if people like where the answers are taking them, they'll keep digging. But when it gets uncomfortable, when it gets inconvenient, when you have to, God forbid, ensure due process for the most reprehensible people, like you said, they're going to take a hall pass.
There's a lot of inconvenient truths in South Carolina.
Well, let's talk about Blanca Simpson because this was probably one of our heaviest traffic videos of the year. Was the interview that we did with Blanca Simpson just last month.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not very long ago. And I remember doing this interview, sitting down with her. I didn't know what to expect. She was somebody that a lot of people had thought was kind of a minor actor in this, but her connections to the Murdaugh family, her perspective on this story, Jen, just incredibly.
It's important because she was she was very close to that family. She wasn't just an employee. I think, she was very close to Maggie. She knew their routines. She was, among the last people to be in the house before the murders, cooking them dinner. She
Their
talked,
last meal.
yeah. She talked to Maggie that day. And I think her perspective was really interesting, especially when she talked about, just how close Maggie and Alec were. That surprised me. Because that is not what you hear from people covering this story. If you listen to, the noise, Maggie was searching for a divorce attorney. I've never found any proof of that.
And Blanca completely shut that down.
Yeah, she said, they, after the kids were both out of the house, they were closer than ever. If Alec was going somewhere, Maggie would tag along if she could. So yeah, I think that surprised me. And I think, just her insights into their routines, their habits, and their relationships it's critical. And it shocked me a lot when she talked about the investigation.
Yeah, let's cut. We've got some clips here. Jen, walk us through these clips we're going to listen to.
So we're going to start the first. This was a really good, you did a great job with this interview. But you were talking about the investigation, and when SLED, South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, questioned her, and I was surprised at her answer.
Let's take a listen.
That's fine. But
Did they question you? Did SLED question you?
not for a week and a half later. About a week and a half later passed before they spoke to me.
And obviously they waited to search the house. There were many other.
I had no idea. I was criticized for, it was said that I cleaned the crime scene, that I washed the blood out of the shower, that I, moved stuff around, straightened out. And so it deflected off of law enforcement. And I was the one that basically messed up the crime scene. Well, where was the search warrant on the house? Nobody told me I couldn't go in. Nobody said anything to me. Nobody stopped me. Nothing. I went straight in the house. I stood there. Nobody stopped me. I was never made aware that there was people in that house. I did not know that there was people in the house that night.
And that's just one of the bombshell revelations from that interview, Jen.
Right. She made dinner for them that night. She was talking to Maggie that day. She saw Alec that morning, and it took them a week and a half to interview her. A week and a half. And it wasn't it wasn't like she was a favorable witness to Alec Murdaugh either. In fact, she indicated and this was her testimony was one of the first times people were like, wait a minute, this guy was covering it up, because she talked about how he would set up her clothes to make it look like she'd put her clothes out, and little things like that sort of planted the seed. But to me, the bombshell moment in that interview was when she offered that she knew who helped him. Yeah. And we had to kind of clarify, like, wait a minute, you're talking about helped him. Right. Do it or cover it up. And she has clarified that it was helping him cover it up. But this was just a jaw drop moment. Dylan, let's cut to that clip where Blanca talks about that.
They can try to explain it any way they want to. But
do you think he had help?
I do.
Really?
I do.
I got to ask the next question. Who do you think helped him?
I will not disclose that.
For reasons of?
My safety.
Yeah.
My safety. I know who they are.
You do?
I do.
Well, that's just, I
got goosebumps when she said that.
Well,
because I had heard from local sources, that there were people out there that night before police arrived.
Yeah.
There's nothing verifiable. It's why I was always so anxious to see any geofencing evidence that they had done. I wanted to see if, any other phones had come into the area of that tower. I never thought he cleaned that scene up alone. There's no way.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, I'm going to get so much crap for this every time I say this. I don't think he did it alone.
Oh, wow.
I just don't. The two weapons doesn't make sense. And to me, I've been all up in Alex Murdaugh's crimes for years.
Yeah.
He did not do his own dirty work. I mean, he had people do his dirty deeds for him. And I talked to somebody who said when they had to put their dog down, because out in the country they shoot their dogs when they have to put them down. He couldn't even do that. So to me, it doesn't make sense.
This is the guy that's going to blow his beloved son's head clean off.
Right.
No. Yeah. It
just doesn't. I don't know. Do I think he's where he belongs in prison? Yes. Do I think he knows who did it? Yes. Why isn't he telling? I don't know.
Well, that's important because I don't want this to devolve into some sort of sympathy for Alec Murdaugh's situation because neither of us feel that.
No,
this guy had a chance to come clean.
Right.
He had a chance to come clean and he lied.
He lied on the stand.
And lied and then got caught in a lie on the stand. I mean, I give credit where it's due to Creighton Waters. And also I want to say the entire team from the AG's office, whether it was Creighton, Savannah Gowd, those guys did an amazing job. And I don't want anything that we say here to detract from the job that the state did. Because this is a tough case. You got no murder weapons. You got obviously a timeline that has some sketchy components to it that you've uncovered. So they did an amazing job. They got all that evidence in. It's not their fault the judge let it in. If it ends up he let that in improperly, that's not on the prosecutors.
No, they were doing their jobs.
Correct. And so I do want to separate kind of when we talk about this stuff. By no means are we impugning the incredible work that they did. I guess the question that we have now is, with all these credible allegations about the integrity of their verdicts and some of these new things we're finding out about this broader drug network and Blanca's admissions, where is the investigation into those things? Or are we so focused again on protecting these verdicts at all costs that we're just going to ignore all this other stuff that's
noise.
The noise. Never forget that guy. Unbelievable. But Jen, again, we've faced a lot of intimidation this year on this story. And the folks who've done that intimidating, you know who you are. But we are not going to be intimidated. We're going to continue to dive into every part of this. And as we approach that February hearing, we're going to continue to dig into the legal arguments that are going to form the basis of this appeal. We're going to focus on those arguments. We're going to talk to all the key players. In fact, we're going to have the Attorney General of the state in this studio very soon. We're going to continue to lead the coverage on this. And folks, unlike a lot of other people who pick one side or pick the other, we're going to go where the truth leads us, however inconvenient that may be. Now, Jen, another story that has produced some inconvenience for us. My parents were even giving me grief about this story because they know so many folks who are tight with the Clemson crowd, but the saga of Clemson University, which I got to be honest, we've been leading the coverage of this. I'm not entirely sure I completely understand it. It's a land deal. They called it Clemson West. It was going to be some massive development. The university really wanted it to happen. The president of the university and its most famous trustee, Nikki Haley, they're on the board of this company that really wanted it to happen. But all we've uncovered so far is that the university got caught lying about its involvement.
They got caught with their purple and orange pants down, dude. Well, and this story, when
yeah, take us back. Tell us who
Oconee
really...
County Council, the council chairman, Matthew Durham, Clemson and United Homes Group, who is a large home building company in the southeast, they went in front of Oconee County Council and proposed a land deal, but they would have to make some changes to zoning changes. And Matthew Durham, who came into the studio for an interview, and just a great guy. He had a lot of questions. He had
He
a
did.
lot of questions about, these proposed zoning changes, and he started digging. And United Homes Group, who is proposing this development, and I mean, very, very big, it's called the Newry development. We've got the plans for
It's
it.
like over 5,000 homes.
Yeah,
and a
it
ton
was
of
it was
other-
huge, and it
Yeah.
also had Clemson facilities on it. So he started digging and realized that the president, James Clements, and Nikki Haley were on the board, and he was like, "Wait a second,
Yeah.
who's in charge of this deal? Is it United Homes Group? Is Clemson involved?" Clemson swore up and down they weren't involved. So Matthew Durham, bless his heart, just kept submitting FOIAs.
Yeah.
And the more he got back, the more evident it became that Clemson was very aware of this development.
And this thing just snowballed because I remember your first report on this was shortly after Matthew Durham began releasing some of these FOIA results. And your first report was in early October.
Yeah.
And it was very shortly thereafter that we started to see just this snowball effect.
Every article I did, it was like, so I would do the article about the development, and all of a sudden, Nikki Haley and Clements resigned from UHG's board.
Yeah, from the big home builder.
So
that was behind the
you
development.
do an article on that, and UHG's stock plummets. And I mean, it
You
was.
couldn't have given me an inside tip there.
I didn't. My brain doesn't do math, man. I mean, it's
we
just
would be
that
terrible criminals.
we would. And that, then you get every story I did, it was like a cause and reaction.
Yeah.
Like it was wild. And so Clemson releases statements like denying their involvement, and all of a sudden President Clements announces his resignation just after he had signed a new contract in 2024.
Yeah, less than a year after he announces a 5-year extension, all of a sudden.
In fact, this is his last day as president.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. The provost is taking over as interim president as they do the executive search for a new one. But
And Nikki Haley will be one of the deciding votes on that search, won't she?
She sure will. She sure will.
Funny how
And
that works.
I don't think that this story is over, because the more that Clemson denies it, the more Matthew Durham FOIAs, and the more the FOIA results. So recently, his most recent post was FOIA results regarding the PR company that they hired in the aftermath in October to help them navigate. And this was, I think it was UHG that hired them.
Yeah.
But for some reason, all of the Clemson execs were in on these emails
Oh, yeah.
regarding the
He's got
public
them by the
statement.
balls. I mean, he's caught them in so many
It
lies.
is absolutely crazy when, all they had to do is tell the truth. Yeah, we're hoping to expand into Oconee County. Yeah, we do have some Clemson facilities on the property.
But wouldn't telling the truth have forced them to admit that, hey, our president and one of our most famous trustee are profiting from a deal that we're pushing?
Yeah.
I mean, that's not very ethical.
It's not ethical. Is it illegal? I don't know.
So they decided to lie about it and just hope no one would catch up to it. But they didn't count on Matthew Durham. They sure as hell didn't count on you, Jen Wood, because you have been driving this. And
Man, I was mad when you assigned that to me.
yeah, because you got your
My
daughter.
daughter goes there, and I was waiting for my residency application to get approved. Like,
When you've done all the reporting on this, but people giving me grief saying, "Oh, you hate Clemson." Well, I do. I'm a South Carolina boy.
I don't hate Clemson. I'm giving them a ton of money.
Yeah, but they should see how I hate on South Carolina, my alma mater.
Yeah.
I mean, they think I hate on Clemson.
Don't think we aren't looking into South Carolina.
Yeah, we are. It's in South Carolina. That's the thing. I mean, all of these higher ed institutions, and I don't want to get too into the editorial side of things tonight because we've got so much to cover. But FITSNews has been saying for years, privatize it. Privatize it. This is not a core function of government. As much as I love lesbian Sanskrit, you should not be able to get tax money to get a lesbian Sanskrit degree. I'm sorry.
Oh, so is my degree worthless? I'm kidding.
For real, privatize it. Let the free market determine whether or not that degree is going to be something you can turn into money down the road. So, and again, I say that somebody with 2 degrees from the University of South Carolina, basically worthless at this point, but privatize it. Let the market do it. This is not a core function of government. And that way, these people, if they want to do these land deals, knock yourselves out.
Have at it.
There's no corruption. But in this case, you've got Clemson University, not only a state school, but a state school where a majority of the board is appointed unconstitutionally.
Right. And that was really interesting to me because you harp on a lot of stuff. And I'm like, Jesus, like, why does that matter? This
Like,
is why it
shut up.
matters. Nikki Haley's got a lifetime appointment.
Yeah, there's no taking her off that board.
She's there. It is what it is. And, when she's not, she appoints her successor, correct?
She does. She gets to pick. That's right.
And now I see why how I
Yeah.
get it.
Yeah, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And until we get to the bottom of this unconstitutional board appointment situation at Clemson, we're going to continue to see stuff like this.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately. But Jen, amazing work, not only on the Murdaugh appeal, not only on all of the background info that you've uncovered in the aftermath of the Murdaugh trial, but the Clemson story, so much of it, and you're going to be coming back on in a minute. Before we go to the next segment of the show, though, I real quick want to do a shout out for our merch store. And the guy who has set that merch store up is about to come on, the flu-ridden Andrew Fancher, our lead investigative reporter. He's going to break down some of the big stories this year on corrupt law enforcement. But Andy also is our merch maven. He's our merch expert. He's the guy who set the merch store up. And so I've been rocking the FITSNews sweatshirt. I didn't wear it tonight. I should have worn it. Yeah, there we go. We got the mug. So there you go, right there. FITSNews mugs, but we got sweatshirts with these cool logos on it. People have been really digging it. So if you do get a chance, go to FITSNews.com. Just click the merch tab. If you've already subscribed and you want to help us out, buy a sweatshirt, buy a mug. That helps us. But before we bring Andy in, we're going to drop a quick promo. And this is, I got to say, we've done a lot of great video work here at FITSNews. Dylan and Andy are just, they're savants when it comes to this stuff.
Yeah, thank God.
But this is one of the best things I think we have ever done video-wise. I got to give a shout out to Andy. So as we roll him in, let's check out the unfinished record of ex-sheriff and convicted felon Chuck Wright.
Right by God's people. Certainly by God first.
Hold on.
Everyone, it's Andrew Fancher with FITSNews.com. For months, our media outlet has been peeling back the veil on decades of alleged corruption tied to the Spartanburg County Sheriff's Office. It all started with our reporting on now former Sheriff Chuck Wright,
You like that?
a so-called constitutional cop who now stands convicted of stealing public funds and obtaining opioids through misrepresentation. But for anyone needing a recap of how we got here, FITSNews was the first media outlet to confirm that Wright was under a criminal investigation, months before mainstream media was forced to recognize that one of their allies was a federal suspect.
Remember, like it to stop it.
We then became the only media outlet to report that a federal grand jury had been impaneled in Colombia, right around the time Wright checked out of the sheriff's office and into a rehab clinic in Florida. Not only that, we were the first media outlet to name drop the sheriff's office chaplain and the so-called code enforcement officer months before both pled guilty to their roles in stealing money from the public. Around that same time, FITSNews was hearing directly from officers who described a much broader network of criminal activity, including one that purportedly bankrolled Wright's first bid for sheriff.
We're not doing all we can to get rid of the drugs in our neighborhoods.
Yet, by all accounts, no one at the state or federal level appears to have looked in this direction. Instead, Wright was slapped with 3 white-collar offenses and remains at home pending his sentencing in 2026. And that's where the federal investigation appears to stop and where the real reporting begins. FITSNews is continuing to track a network of LLCs tied to a well-entrenched family whose members were previously charged with bribing law enforcement and operating an illegal gambling racket in the Carolinas. And as we follow that thread, another figure is coming into focus. A helicopter pilot with dozens of LLCs and prior charges for bribing law enforcement and operating an illegal gambling racket in the Carolinas. Now, it's worth noting that those specific charges have since been resolved, meaning we can't say for certain whether the LLCs registered from Dubai to DC are currently generating legitimate income. But what we can say is that both camps appear to share a single touch point in their almost unbelievable histories. The Spartanburg County Sheriff's Office. If you have any information regarding corruption in South Carolina law enforcement, please email our team via tipline@fitsnews.com. And for just $10.99 a month, please consider a FITSNews.com subscription so we can keep digging.
This is not over. This ain't nowhere near over. We just started.
Nowhere near over, Andy Fancher. He's got that right, doesn't he?
He might have one thing right. Sheriff Wright might have that correct. And just for you bringing attention to my ailments, I hope I brought back Ebola from Dallas for the fans of the year 2014. But on the topic of more pressing things that also involves medication, albeit illegal narcotics, Chuck Wright, the once most recognized law enforcement officer of South Carolina, one of the longest serving sheriffs in South Carolina, to one of the largest counties in South Carolina, is now a federal convict awaiting sentencing in 2026.
And part of this story, though, Andy, we looked at all the things that he could have been charged with federally that he wasn't charged with, and how he's now looking at some comparatively light federal charges, but he's also looking at no state charges. And that's significant because we've got Donald Trump in the White House, a guy who has been known to pardon good, God-fearing Republican sheriffs. And he's got Trey Gowdy. Yeah, there's Trump and Chuck Wright right there, folks. Andy's holding them up. But he's got Trey Gowdy as one of his attorneys, a guy who's got some pull with the White House, a former U.S. congressman.
Who has secured a pardon already in the year 2025 for one of his clients.
So when you first started calling out the solicitor up there in Anderson County, Micah Black, who was referred this case, we were looking at this and it's sort of like, well, wait a minute, why is this such a big deal? Well, this is why it's a big deal. The lack of state charges against Chuck Wright is significant, isn't it?
It's yeah, I mean, it's half of the pizza here. We don't know what he was facing at the state level, but what Micah Black did submit in his own declination letter was that the feds, SLED, the State Ethics Commission, uncovered, quote, overwhelming evidence that both Wright and Durham, a co-conspirator at the federal level, committed numerous crimes over the past several years, yet dropped any and all charges related to the state level inquest into Chuck Wright and his administration.
When you started digging into this case, Andy, did you ever think that it would spin off into so many different rabbit holes in the aftermath? Because you and Jen have been digging hard, not just on the allegations against Chuck Wright and his tenure as sheriff, but some of this, I call them spin-off dramas, some of the people he rolled and sat with. And you guys have found some crazy stuff.
I mean, as the promo indicates, this vortex is so far from being understood. I mean, with the help of Jen Wood, and perhaps you could speak more to your process, but I mean, we have uncovered dozens and dozens, maybe even hundreds of LLCs at this point, tied to men and women within Wright's orbit, people that make you wonder why is the former sheriff of Spartanburg County, who claims to be this Christian sheriff from heaven, associating himself with these extremely untoward people. We've got FOIAs deployed to departments across the Carolinas and beyond. In fact, just yesterday, we got an incident report back to one of Chuck's alleged friends that we've been looking into for several weeks now. We have another incident report back conveniently from the 7th Circuit Solicitor's Office related to a murder from the early 90s. In fact, we're looking at a few cold cases that have spanning numerous decades.
And not
in
so cold
South
cases when
Carolina.
you look at the Superbike murders.
Well, yes, we are also taking a fresh look at some solved cases, emphasis on solved there. And let me just say too that none of this would be possible. None of the revelations, whether it be helicopter pilots with over 65 LLCs tied to their name, ranging from Virginia to Dubai, whether it be very institutionalized gambling families up in that region who appeared to have funneled cash into Chuck's campaign coffers as early as his first bid for sheriff. None of this would be possible without good cops.
Yeah.
It's almost disheartening because we hit the Spartanburg County Sheriff's Office so often, and rightfully so. Look at what we've uncovered. Look at what the feds missed. But it would not be possible without some of just the absolutely most amazing individuals I've had the pleasure of meeting in our Badges Gone Bad series. In fact, I was talking to a source just the other day, noting how it has almost restored some kind of faith in law enforcement to know that cops like this do exist.
But
It's
don't they get disappointed when they see resolutions like this that are kind of like, eh? I mean,
disappointed is an understatement. And I want to just pull up. So Micah Black, as you noted, the 10th Circuit solicitor that was referred the state level case by Alan Wilson, of all people. Officers used to like this gentleman. Now officers refer to him as the silent solicitor. He has gotten that nickname thanks to his inability to respond to any email ever sent from my desk regarding Chuck Wright, specifically questions that are echoing the sentiments of the law enforcement officers that he claims to represent. So disappointment is an understatement. And in fact, because the feds appear to have, as you put it a couple weeks back, left so much meat on this bone, we're having more and more people reaching out. And the places that we're going with these tips, this information, it is beyond my comprehension.
This case fascinates me because Andy's sources are phenomenal. But when you're researching, you go down a rabbit hole and you hit a dead end. It just it happens. It's like, there isn't anything there. I've not had that happen yet in Spartanburg. It has not happened yet.
And Andy,
No.
you've also found there's a cold case that's been part of our Unsolved Carolinas features involving a murder from the 90s. Is that correct, that you guys have been digging in?
Yeah, we've been digging into a few murders, as a matter of fact. And as I just mentioned, we got an entire case file back just today from the 7th Circuit Solicitor's Office, which is the judicial circuit that oversees Spartanburg County. We're looking into things that former SCSO deputies and detectives have kind of pointed us and pivoted us in the direction of, cold cases that appear to be connected. And on that specific murder that you noted, yes, I have hyper focused on the unsolved case of Anna Caroline Lake. She was a 20-year-old James F. Burns High School graduate who went missing in 1990, and her weathered remains were found off of a stretch of highway, conveniently previously known as the Sheriff Charles L. Chuck Wright Highway, Highway 29, in 1993. So tips are active and incoming related to that. We are awaiting multiple FOIAs back from the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, from the Spartanburg County Sheriff's Office. And just yesterday, I kicked out that both of those agencies have confirmed receipt of those FOIAs. I'm curious to see what, if anything, is in there, what they have or what they don't have.
It's fascinating. The Caroline Lake case, I look at a lot of cold cases when I do the Unsolved Carolina story. And that one's really heartbreaking because there's not a lot of coverage on it. I mean, when she initially went missing, there were articles. When her remains were found, there were articles. Her mother talked to the press, and she was heartbroken. She just didn't understand why there wasn't movement on this case, and then it just poof disappears.
And that's one of the many anecdotes that I've kind of been harping on, both online and I guess to anybody listening. I'm calling it one of the least publicized cold cases in Spartanburg County history. No call to action for decades. I mean, at least at
No
a cursory
billboards.
search, nothing. At a cursory
She's
search,
beautiful.
the
just
last
this beautiful
time,
young woman.
Well, I mean, the facts of this case are something that forensic files would go crazy over. I mean, like you said, yeah, beautiful white girl goes missing. Her remains are found scattered, which could have been by animals, but nonetheless, scattered in this wood patch off of Old Spartanburg Highway. At a cursory search, there does not appear to have been any publishings of her name since 1999. So it,
So a
it
quarter
makes you
century
wonder.
without anyone talking about her case.
Well, civilians, of course, but
Wow.
but mainstream, which, as we already know, has consistently failed Spartanburg County and the greater upstate area.
That's for sure.
And again, I hate to knock MSM as well, because I also have come to know some great people in the upstate region who have admitted their newsroom's favoritism to the former sheriff, saying we could have been provided videos of Chuck Wright doing X, Y, and Z, and our news director would say, "Let's sit on it." So
You
mainstream
don't have that
has
problem
failed.
here, do you?
In what
You don't have that
department?
problem here, do you?
No, I used to. For frequent followers, I used to work for an NBC affiliate, and now the chains that bound me are long gone. But no, this is something that at least for us, it's just the beginning. I can only imagine what 2026 is going to hold for us. I mean, again, we've got dozens and dozens of FOIAs spanning multiple states at this point. I mean, on a daily basis, I'm getting contacted by folks who, at least in my opinion, are doing the right thing by coming forward. This is a judgment-free zone here. We've talked to individuals familiar with both sides of that pointed SCSO star, whether it be individuals who are blackballed from law enforcement for speaking out against Chuck Wright, which has happened, or folks, as I like to call it, in the underworld sector of Spartanburg County, equally allegedly wronged by Chuck Wright. Our doors are open.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Andy, this was probably the biggest Badge Gone Bad takedown of the past year, but it sure wasn't the only one.
Unfortunately, it wasn't the only
you were
one.
a busy dude in 2025 exposing law enforcement corruption across the Palmetto State. Walk us through some of the greatest hits, Andy.
Some of the greatest hits, yeah. And it was funny, as I was just printing out some of the photographs of individuals who we've had the pleasure or displeasure of reporting on. We actually ran out of toner in the printer, so my visuals are limited. But it's a testament to the work we're doing here with Badges Gone Bad. I mean, it is the story that will never end. It's quite disheartening that there is so much content in at least South Carolina, but I doubt that it's limited to just the Palmetto State. So on the topic of sheriffs, and we've got a package that will accompany to this, we had former Williamsburg County Sheriff Stephen Gardner, who was indicted earlier this year. You did the print edition. I attended the bond court hearing in Richland County, or not only he, but a co-conspirator, the former treasurer. They appeared for their bond court hearing. And without further ado, if we could roll that package.
Do you swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
Thank you.
This is former Williamsburg County Sheriff Stephen Gardner standing in a Richland County, South Carolina courthouse as a defendant. Just 2 days earlier, the two-term sheriff and his alleged accomplice were indicted on 9 counts, including criminal conspiracy, official misconduct, embezzlement, money laundering, and accepting illegal payments as a public official.
And when we actually do the math,
According to Chief Prosecutor Creighton Waters, former Sheriff Gardner and then County Supervisor Tiffany Cooks diverted over $27,000 in federal COVID relief funds.
I want to make sure that everyone gets out and vote, whether you vote.
The scheme was allegedly devised after Cooks lost her primary bid for re-election in 2022, prompting a series of inflated checks to a third-party contractor with leftover cash delivered straight to Gardner.
As described by the state, this is an alleged economic crime.
Defense attorney Deborah Barbier did not address the allegations against Gardner, but described her client as a trusted law enforcement officer who served South Carolina for more than 25 years. Following his indictment, Governor Henry McMaster suspended Gardner and appointed state agent Clemson Wright Jr. as interim sheriff, calling him a, quote, fit and proper person to serve. But open source intelligence, or OSINT, revealed interim Sheriff Wright was previously married to Cooks, his predecessor's alleged co-conspirator in a scheme to defraud their constituents.
She's not a flight risk. She has no criminal record. This is a financial crime.
Cooks appeared in bond court after Gardner and, like the former sheriff, was granted a $100,000 personal recognizance bond by Circuit Court Judge Heath Taylor. Gardner faces a maximum sentence of 40 years if convicted, while Cooks faces 45. For FITSNews.com, I'm Andrew Fancher.
We back? So that package is outdated.
Yeah.
Because since we kicked that video out, and as Jen Wood has reported, authorities have identified additional co-conspirators in this scheme to defraud one of the poorest counties in South Carolina. I believe at least 3 and at least 400,000 in what authorities referred to as unlawful payouts. And while I'd love to spend more time on Williamsburg, alas, that is not the last sheriff to be arrested in South Carolina in 2025. Right around that same time, I mean, within weeks of Gardner getting indicted at the state level, we had the second arrest of former Colleton County Sheriff Andy Strickland. Now, if you recall this gentleman specifically with his name associated with domestic violence cases, that's because, and I believe you reported on this tremendously in 2019, he was charged by SLED for what was it? Let me refer to my notes here. Punching his wife in the face with a closed fist more than once. And that arrest didn't lead to multiple public corruption indictments. And then, of course, while he was out on bond for that, he catches a second domestic violence arrest.
Yeah, he's allegedly a serial abuser of women. We've heard other stories about him tied to other women, but yeah.
And this was just the third sheriff to be popped in South Carolina this year. And I guess the final honorable mention for 2025, I mean, we would not be able to exit this segment without giving some love to former York County Sheriff Kevin Tolson.
Well, he's had a rough go.
Oh, man. And that mugshot definitely indicates that it was a rough night. You know, it's funny about Andy Strickland here. I would much rather show his booking photo, but the Bamberg County Detention Center told me they couldn't find it when he was arrested. They had misplaced this gentleman's booking photo. Fortunately, that is not the case for York County. And if we could pull up Mr. Tolson's booking photo, as well as the ride, the Ford Lariat that he allegedly rolled that led to that criminal charge. So Kevin Tolson, in July of this year, he, like I just mentioned, he totaled his Ford Lariat on Airport Road in Rock Hill, which is an area of the county that, I mean, he previously oversaw from 2017 to 2024. And as that booking photo indicates, there might have been some substances at play. Why else would you have fled the scene of that incident? So he was popped by Highway Patrol simply with failure to report a collision. But I mean, that's nonetheless a criminal charge and booking for yet another sheriff. And these are just the gentlemen that we know of in 2025. A lot of, at least my reporting, a ton of the Badge Gone Bad reporting is source-based, thanks to former and active law enforcement members, which is how we were able to report on Tolson. I believe how we were able to report on Strickland and so many others.
Yeah, and 4 sheriffs getting popped in 1 year, Andy, that's almost a slow year in South Carolina. We got so many sheriffs getting busted for things. You know, Kenny Boone over in Florence, he went down a few years back. The former Williamsburg sheriff, a dozen years ago went down. So it's like
tradition.
Yeah, it's the same
And
county.
Kenny Boone, allegedly a friend of Chuck Wright as well. And if we look at sheriffs that have fallen in just the past few years, I mean, Greenville is no exception, which is, as a matter of fact, where we had a weighty badge gone bad. Not necessarily a sheriff, but a lieutenant over at the Greenville County Sheriff's Office. It was not only a rough year for former Sheriff Tolson, but for now former Greenville Lieutenant Daryl J. Kicklighter. I think it's safe to say that we led the coverage and actually effectuated some change in that department. I also have a video to accompany this, but just as a little precursor, Daryl J. Kicklighter, he became the subject of a SLED investigation, allegations of misconduct, white umbrella, in August of 2024, okay? Which means that for 7 months, that man maintained a county paycheck while wearing his county uniform to the Greenville County Sheriff's Office, and nothing happened until we kicked out this recording.
You remember that?
I do
You
remember
stupid
that.
fuck.
This is Greenville County Sheriff's Lieutenant Jay Kicklighter, now under investigation by the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, or SLED.
You're calling me a stupid
You
fuck?
are a stupid fuck.
This recording, captured during a heated exchange with his wife, appears to reference the incident that landed him on administrative duty.
I should have.
Don't get in my face.
I should have beat you black and blue for the shit you did to me.
I was black and blue.
So when I
that night.
grabbed you around your neck and you said, "Kill me,"
Under investigation for alleged misconduct, Kicklighter was previously accused of adultery. In February of 2024, a private investigator tracked the deputy across multiple locations, documenting what the PI described as a secretive relationship with a married hairdresser. While Kicklighter's county-issued Tahoe was photographed during these rendezvous, it remains unclear as to whether he was on duty.
you remember that?
I do
You
remember
stupid
that.
fuck.
As of this recording, he remains employed by the Greenville County Sheriff's Office. For FITSNews.com, I'm Andrew Fancher.
And we're back. So again, like I emphasized before that recording was kicked out, absolutely nothing happened. Once we published that, within the month, that video being released, Kicklighter was terminated from the Greenville County Sheriff's Office, albeit for reasons not involving misconduct. And they failed to note in his separation papers that he was under a SLED investigation, which was true. So somebody omitted something from the separation papers. But why does that matter? That only happens all the time. And in May of 2025, he was charged with domestic violence by agents with the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division.
And Andy, this is something we've seen all over the state. I mean, you talked about the sheriff getting hit with it. You talked about Kicklighter, the DV charges against him. We got a DV charge we reported on just today down in North Charleston involving not an officer, but a very powerful businessman down in the city of Charleston. I'm referring to Freddie Rankin, who is the president of Sea Fox Boats. That's a big company down there, and it was a company involved in a major potential deal with the city of North Charleston. One of the people who has since been federally indicted is North Charleston Councilman Jerome Hayward, who was involved in that deal. But you did some coverage on a deal with Jerome Hayward. This is a story, this North Charleston story. It's one that the three of us have really been working hard on. You've been covering it. Jen's been covering it. I've been on it. It's been a team effort really exposing all of the corruption down there. But it's bigger than just law enforcement down there. And Andy, it's law enforcement. It's law enforcement leadership. It's county council down there. Hell, we've had how many of them, Jen, resign?
3.
Yeah.
3? Yeah, I think 3.
And
well, that's because they were arrested by the feds, right?
yeah. That's what it took.
That's what it took, literally. As we were reporting on them being under federal investigations, but there was nothing to look into there. There was no reason for the mayor, who's previously the police chief of that scandal-scarred department, to do anything. I love how blind our public servants become when the feds show up.
Yeah. All of a sudden, all that local corruption kind of dissipates a bit. But you did a great story on one of the North Charleston police leaders who was very hesitant to respond to our inquiries. How would you describe, what was it, 100 and something days?
111 days later.
That's when she responded to your inquiry, huh?
Yeah, and I was kind of inspired because that was right when they'd released the sequel for 28 Days Later, which is, about a virus that plagued an entire continent. So it seemed pretty on brand. But yes, in their report 111 days later, I detail in probably too much detail how Associate Chief Karen Cadre appears to have just steamrolled a FOIA request that was for a simple traffic stop, even though that simple traffic stop, there was nothing simple about it. We had an officer who appears to have done the right thing. I don't know if I'd call it forcibly resigned, terminated. Either way, he's no longer with the department after, again, effectuating a traffic stop the right way. Unfortunately for the officer, as we've seen across the state, he pulled over what appears to be a well-connected individual. How well-connected? Well, that individual was photographed on multiple occasions with the former police chief turned mayor of North Charleston, and it appears as though that individual during the traffic stop made some calls and somehow managed to drive away without a license plate on his pickup. It makes you wonder. So it's just one after the other in North Charleston. I mean, we're pulling at several threads right now involving NCPD, whether it be the hero cop, literally the hero cop that was terminated after appearing to abuse police technology to stalk at least one of his girlfriends, or some new hires that were previously transferred in that aren't passing the smell test either. But hey, there's nothing to look into there. So, Chief Camacho, keep doing what you're doing. North Charleston, keep doing what you're doing. We're not going anywhere.
Well, it's funny because the North Charleston FOIA lack of response, they're hoping we forget about it. Fincher does not forget.
No, we do
he
not
keeps
forget.
track of the days. I mean, just assume if we're going to FOIA for something, we know it's there. Don't withhold it. Give it to us or ask for an extension. And Fincher's not going to forget.
Well, aren't FOIAs just a racket, though? I mean, talk about a way to obfuscate and just avoid any accountability at all. I know I keep saying the word disheartening, but I mean, how else do you call it when the institutions that we are subsidizing is gatekeeping information that could hold them accountable? Yeah, I get the press releases are great, and MSM just regurgitates something that some institution sent out on how great they're doing. But that's not always the case. North Charleston is a prime example.
North Charleston's the reason we adjusted our FOIA language because we figured out how they were, like,
because
where
of the
they were.
Club incident involving Hayward.
Yes, because they were putting their notes in a specific part of the system.
Mm-hmm.
So now all of our FOIAs we go out, we specifically ask for this part of the system.
Isn't that amazing? They're actively trying to figure out how to hide public documents from the public.
It makes you wonder too. Okay, where are the representatives? Where are where's the legislature that should be appalled by this conduct, whether it be in North Charleston or under the previous administration, Chuck Wright in Spartanburg County, or in the dozens and dozens of municipalities that I'm constantly reporting on, who doesn't either respond to media requests or FOIAs. I mean, Hampton, right?
Oh, Jesus God. They did actually respond to a FOIA recently, and God bless them. I was like, what?
We shouldn't be excited about that, though. This should just be something that they do.
The very first time.
Yeah.
The very first time. But man, I'm going to give them a little credit. After all of the grief I've given them, they did respond.
Yeah, after, committing multiple violations of South Carolina Code of Law, you did one thing.
I did a whole article on why freedom of information matters based on Hampton's lack of response.
Yeah. It's unbelievable, though, that's we have to insist on this because, I mean, hey, these are public records. They're ours. They belong to the people. They don't belong to these institutions. But
if there's any justice in this world, it's that individuals like 10th Circuit Solicitor Micah Black does get coined the silent solicitor for declining to respond to literally any email from FITSNews regarding his decision to decline to prosecute somebody as big, as momentous as Chuck Wright.
Well, here's what's so disappointing about it, too, is that, FITSNews has a reputation as a media outlet that has an open microphone. We go off the record with people all the time. If you walk us through your narrative,
help me understand.
Make it make sense.
Yep.
Exactly. Make it make sense. And a lot of times, Andy, there's not a conspiracy at play. There's a real explanation as for why law enforcement or prosecutors or judges do a certain thing. But when they don't tell us, when they hide the ball, when they wait 111 days, that sends a terrible, terrible message. But obviously, the North Charleston story is continuing. The federal investigation is ongoing. I reached out to Debbie Barbier just today, who is the attorney who has represented Freddie Rankin. Like the former prosecutor, Will Lewis, she was less than inclined to shed any light on this. No comment from her regarding the latest situation with Freddie Rankin. Disappointing seeing these former prosecutors who used to uphold integrity now part of the whitewash. We're seeing it far too often here in South Carolina. But Andy, I want to shift gears here. another story that the three of us have really worked hard on, along with Dylan Nolan this past year. It was a huge, huge story. I'm referring, of course, to the saga of R.J. May. As we switch out here,
I'm giving
we're getting
everybody a bola tonight.
We're getting Dylan. Yeah, that was quite a transition there. But this was one of the biggest political stories, crime stories that we covered. It involves now former South Carolina State Representative and former Freedom Caucus Vice Chair R.J. May, one of the more influential political consultants in South Carolina, one of the more influential lawmakers in South Carolina, given his prominent leadership role in the Freedom Caucus. But this man, as we exclusively reported back in August of 2024, it's been a while. We first reported it over a year ago that this guy was staring down a pretty disturbing line of questioning regarding alleged child sex abuse material, child porn. As we covered this, as we began to detail exactly what was at stake here, it led to this June, this past spring, when May was arrested and then indicted by the feds on multiple counts of possessing this just horrific material. Dylan, Andy, let's talk a little bit about this case. First, I want to address it from just the standpoint of what happened with RJ. And you were the only guy, Andy, that had pictures of his actual arrest.
Yeah, and I don't know with our new technical hand over there, if we could pull up some of those pictures that I snapped on that June 11th arrest, right outside of his home there in Lexington County, the district where he represented.
That's right, Dylan. That's your district.
Yes, I'm not for much longer, but yes.
That's right. RJ May's case wasn't the only big pedophile case that we covered. We thought what we saw in RJ May's case was bad because I got to be honest, the descriptions of the materials that he was involved with transferring with other users.
And before we pivot, because it's that story is not over yet. I mean, we're still awaiting a sentencing in that. I mean, yes, he has.
That's coming up in 2 weeks.
It very soon, this coming January.
Yeah.
But if we could just kind of flesh out just a few details related to this case, because even now it's one that just makes me scratch my head. And, you know, maybe you feel the same way about this, Dylan. I mean, according to the feds, RJ was for 5 days one of the most prolific pedophiles in South Carolina history, at least in legislative level. According to prosecutors, he distributed some 470 child sex abuse material, or just calling it what it is, child pornography videos from a Kik account registered under Joe Biden 69. And then just as abruptly as it started, the app was deleted and he did not return to such disgusting and depraved material that we have unfortunately detailed online. The story
that never
still
made
to me,
sense. That never made sense.
To me makes little sense. I mean, what's your thoughts, Dylan?
It's possible, you know, how things are connected in this state, that RJ might have had some advance notice that people might be knocking on his door. Now, why was everything not gotten rid of? I don't know. But if you look at what he was convicted on, it's very little to do with the search warrant they served on his house.
I was about to say everything gotten rid of, according to RJ's own account, because we had FOIA'd for his messages from within the Edgefield County Detention Center, which I believe he currently remains as we are having this conversation. He notes that the feds found no CSAM on like decades worth of hard drives, laptops, flash drives that they had seized from his home.
And unfortunately, when you cover stories like this, you almost always see these people have like terabytes of this stuff stacked up. So you're right in identifying that this is not the usual pattern that you see in a story like this. The story we're about to cover, the story of Judge Gosnell, is one that is typical in that there was a trove of this material discovered. But yes, even RJ's political enemies, people who were happy to see him go down, a couple of them said to me in private conversations that they found the case that the government brought very odd.
Well, and we had found more than a few, I don't know if inconsistencies is the right word, that we did publish on our website. I mean, you know, things that the feds, Department of Homeland Security, should have done before FITSNews did, such as a reverse image search on Google, debunking claims that were made on the stand. So DHS did not come out squeaky clean on this, kind of like how the feds didn't involving Chuck Wright and many other cases. So Yeah, it's one that makes you wonder, and it's one that no matter how much we question it, RJ's looking at a mandatory minimum of 5 years in prison, and if sentenced at the
And he
maximum.
pled. Let's be clear here. I mean, yes, the feds.
We were entertaining all of this stuff because RJ was insisting for quite some time that he was not a guilty man. He was representing
the deep
himself.
state had targeted him. It was a deep state conspiracy, is what he said initially.
And every trial I've ever gone into covering, and as I was preparing to cover this trial alongside you guys, I go in presuming, like a juror would, that this defendant, I give them a clean slate. I try not to come in with presuppositions and let the facts speak for themselves. But obviously, when RJ comes out and says, "I'm guilty of the crimes of which I am accused,"
I mean, I was in that federal courtroom in Columbia when he testified to going under the alias Joe Biden 69, as well as Eric Rentling, which is another alias tethered to all manner of very interesting things that did not rise to any level of
international sex travel, for example.
Correct, which again did not. It's worth emphasizing that alias did not rise to any level of
wearing a GoPro on his head to film sexual encounters overseas with women of questionable ages
in Colombia. Yes, yep. That
not
was
this Colombia, with Colombia.
Colombia, correct. Yeah, Medellin and other locations. So
well, let's do real quick though, and I want to, because we have done a lot on this show, and rightfully so, of kind of crapping on some of the prosecutorial establishments in the state. I want to just give a little credit where it's due to Brian Sterling, the new U.S. attorney for the state of South Carolina. His fingerprints were all over the detention memo for RJ May. They made it abundantly clear that they were going to hold this guy accountable for these crimes, that they were going to expose the heinousness of this, and we're going to get into even worse stuff in this next case. But I want to give Sterling some credit because he showed up personally when RJ May was indicted. He was there personally, talked to the media. He was making absolutely sure that this guy was going to be held accountable. And so
deplorable, depraved, and disgusting. That was the quote of the day after RJ admitted to sending at least 5 child pornography videos, which is what he was ultimately charged with in a plea agreement.
Well, Dylan, we're going to talk later in the show about the political ramifications of the RJ May conviction or plea and the sentencing, which is again coming up here on the 14th, I believe, of January, next 2 weeks. But there's a case out of Charleston that's even more stomach churning. And I got to be honest, guys, when we read the RJ May documents, I thought that was the sickest stuff I'd ever read in my life. But he had nothing on this monster, alleged monster, down in Charleston, former magistrate James Gosnell. Andy, you were on this case from the beginning. This was some of the most graphic, not just possession of the CSAM. This is a guy discussing his own abuse of infants, babies.
Right. And let's give credit where it's due. You broke the story before anybody else that a search warrant was executed at his home, right? I mean, walk us through kind of your fact-finding pattern there in what I guess resulted in his arrest that morning.
Yeah, well, I was the one to break it. I mean, and I think you would probably say the same about some of your stories this year. It comes from the trust that people have in this institution, and that's, things that you've built over 10 years. But we just have people who are very well-placed, well-informed, and who know that we will go to the mat to protect our sources. And enough of them reached out that we knew that something was going on. And we were able to speak with law enforcement and verify that there was a door knock, and it did not take long after that to figure out what that door knock was for. And as well as laid out, it is for horrific child sex crimes. And according to the charging documents, when they arrived at the judge's house, he knew the jig was up basically, and said, what you're looking for is plugged into my computer. And they started downloading files. And of course, it takes a very long time, as we learned with RJ, for them to go through the forensic process of sending these files out so that they can be identified by authorities and matched to known abuse images. But right on the scene, right when they were there, they were able to identify a bunch.
And just a cursory search of that laptop where the flash drive was plugged in, agents saw enough for this search warrant to rise to the level of, we're arresting this guy, which subsequently happened within the morning. Right.
Yeah.
And you know, you say allegedly, and I mean, I guess yes, that's what it is until the conviction. But he admitted to it.
Yeah.
He admitted to when they asked him what might we expect in this hard drive, didn't he say, "quote little babies"?
Yeah.
It's terrible. It's awful.
I mean, this man is familiar enough with the judicial system to know what's going on and know where this is headed, and he put his hands up.
Well, and he's not alone too. There were some of the more graphic, dramatic revelations contained from that search linked him to a guy in Florida. Is that correct?
Correct. John Badger Thorpe, who has since been extradited to South Carolina, and both he and Gosnell are pending a trial at 2026, I believe, as well. So big year. But the feds allege, without getting into too much detail, because I mean we just can't on this live stream. They had met on several occasions to do, you can only imagine. With the help of FedEx, they sent a flash drive, according to the feds, containing child sex abuse material from Florida to South Carolina. These two had a romantic relationship of some kind, and in fact, had the feds not intervened, it appears as though something very heinous was going to go down in Florida. I believe well, let's just say in the months after he was, thank God, arrested. So this is just a disgusting, stomach-churning case. And I guess we'll see what happens at trial.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly, we've got some resolution coming in the RJ May case in 2 weeks' time, but the Gosnell case, still very early in the prosecutorial phase of that, but just unspeakable things. And, you know, as a dad, as a human, you look at this stuff and it just, I couldn't even read it. Couldn't even read it. And as you mentioned, Andy, yeah, they were making plans not just to share this disgusting material, but to actually physically abuse a child. And like you said, thank God that the feds did what they did when they did. You covered some other cases this year, Andy, involving some of this similar stuff. Maybe not quite this high profile, but some other.
But nonetheless, public servants who, according to charging documents, abuse children.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't get any lower than that. I mean, we can laugh at, you know, pill dependencies at the highest level of law enforcement, but there's no joking matter here.
Yeah.
Simply unforgivable. And right there in Charleston County, just this month, and thanks to Jen Wood, who canvasses the federal index, she was stumbled upon the federal indictment of a former firefighter right there in Charleston, John Cottrell, who previously was a high-ranking firefighter in Lexington County, moved to the Low Country. That's where he's popped at the state level with 10 counts of abusing children. And then once the locals started looking into it, they kindly asked the feds, hey, could you look at it? Because it appears as though he might have risen to a federal level, some of the crimes that he committed. So now, according to the feds, he has abused at least 3 children, thanks to a hidden camera system that was located in at least one address, specifically a bathroom, although charging documents note multiple addresses. What addresses means remains unclear, but that's also something that is taking form in 2026. Unfortunately, the child sex cases are not limited to RJ, to Gosnell, his co-conspirator, or the firefighter. I reported extensively on a Spartanburg County deputy who admitted to this kind of conduct, but somehow was able to walk on this kind of conduct. We're looking into another case conveniently in the upstate involving a former SRO that somehow also was allowed to walk after being accused of similar behavior. So
it's everywhere, man. And here's another thing I want to make sure our audience understands. It's not just that we cover these graphic cases and insist on accountability at every stage, not just for the defendants, but that we hold the system accountable. The people prosecuting them, the prosecutors, the judges, all of it. That's our job, is to hold the whole system accountable. But I want to point out that it's not just these stories. Earlier this year, we covered extensively a South Carolina Senate inquiry into the office of Attorney General Alan Wilson. And while they didn't find much publicly that was revealed, one of the things that we uncovered as we investigated the AG's office was some serious funding issues, some attrition, a lack of support for the ICAC, Internet Crimes Against Children division of that office. And again, not pointing the finger of blame at anybody, but this was a division of that office that was down to bare bones. We put out a story highlighting how these people who are responsible for holding these sick people accountable, they were not getting the funding they needed. There were not enough people in these positions. And in the aftermath of our report, I am pleased to let our audience know that the AG's office has ramped up some of the funding for that. They've ramped up positions. They've moved things around in the office to get more support to ICAC. So it's not just the cases that we're following. We are following the institutions responsible for prosecuting them. And I want to just say that that's something that I think it's equally important as these stories. But
I couldn't imagine doing that kind of work. I started my career working over at the Attorney General's office in their communications shop. And one of the things that I did was take headshots for almost every employee in that building. And that was one of the things when I interacted with them that I just could not imagine doing that kind of work. So I really commend the people who, I mean, you're subjecting yourself to just horrific stuff every day.
But it's vital. And also I want to point out, in the aftermath of our report on those deficiencies with the ICAC operation, we've seen a bunch of new press releases coming out of the AG's office of cases that they're getting convictions, pleas. So it is working. It is working, that accountability, that pressure. But guys, I want to shift gears to another story that we covered this year, another high-profile fall from grace.
With a CSAM component, mind you.
It does have a long, outdated CSAM component, but yes, in 2018,
correct,
there was an arrest involving an individual by the name of Howard Knapp. Those charges dismissed, but Howard Knapp made news for a lot of reasons this year. A lot of reasons this year. First, he got in trouble for allegedly helping conspire with Democrats at the South Carolina State House to bring a lawsuit against the state for its compliance with Donald Trump's Department of Justice and efforts to get voter rolls so that they can crack down on illegal immigrants voting. That was a big scandal. And it ultimately led to Knapp getting fired, not because of this alleged conspiracy, but because he got caught lying about it to his commission. You can't lie to the people that you report to. But Knapp's termination unfolded against the backdrop of a Pandora's box of allegations. We are talking about an alleged affair with his top subordinate, a love journal that Knapp allegedly kept with notes to his alleged lover. We had a sex toy. I don't know what we're going to describe it. Jim Griffin gets real mad, Attorney Jim Griffin, when we call it a sex toy. But
I often joke and say that there's 5 people in South Carolina, and stories like this where you have one of Alex Murdaugh's 2 defense attorneys also representing Howard Knapp and telling us not to write about alleged sex toys. It's a small world.
It is a small world, but it's a sex toy. When I looked at this thing up,
you're confident.
I'm confident in calling this thing a vibrator. It is. I'm not going to get into the areas it stimulates, but we're comfortable. We're comfortable in calling what was found in this. Jen Wood is off camera saying that it's a pelvic floor exercise for someone who had just had a baby, but I think it may be a dual use device. Let's just go ahead and say that.
Either way, this is not the kind of stuff you want to be doing in a state office.
Right, exactly. And the other thing is that when the jig was up for these two, for Howie Knapp and his deputy Paige Solanich, who also, by the way, took a lot of expensive trips on the taxpayer dime together all over the country.
I don't know how you could spend hundreds and literally hundreds of dollars at a Starbucks in like one go, unless you're getting like literally $500 gift cards.
Or you're at an
from
airport,
Starbucks.
maybe, if you're at an airport and get like 2 coffees.
Well, yeah. Oh man, those coffee prices are just rackets at the airport. But no, like in all seriousness, I mean, we had FOIA'd for some of their expenditures. I mean, why are we staying at the nicest hotels across the country? I mean, we were staying at the Ritz-Carlton Pentagon. And all for what? To fund what appears to be some kind of extramarital affair for both of these individuals?
Well, and this is a guy who was already under fire. He was the focus, Howie Knapp, the focus of an inspector general's investigation. By the way, that inquiry is ongoing. He's been criminally indicted on a handful of charges, just as his alleged lover has been indicted for wiretapping because she put a listening device allegedly in the conference room.
And they just left all of this out. The hubris of these two.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And this is the top election official for the state. This is the guy who runs elections in South Carolina, or did until he was fired.
Right.
And the one thing I can say is, thank God in South Carolina, the elections are actually mostly handled administratively at the county level. Thank God the state does not have a huge role in any of this, because if these are the people who are counting the votes at the line level, we actually would have a massive problem. But it seems as though election conduct did not get impacted by this.
Which you don't want your vote counter with pelvic floor stimulation while they're counting votes, Dylan?
I would prefer not.
What if that increases productivity?
Oh,
yeah, it might.
Well, the fallout from this, obviously, Howie Knapp has been fired. His deputy, Paige Solanich, has been fired.
Can we pull up the bond court?
Yeah, we've got
photos?
some photos of the two of them. Aaron's going to pull up, but and criminally now charged,
Right.
and investigations ongoing because.
Well, it only took SLED how many months after we were one of the first outlets? I believe that Palmetto State Watch, they've
done amazing work.
Yeoman's work on the Howie Knapp saga. They reported the same day that we did that Howie was under a SLED investigation. I believe that was also just a vague allegations of misconduct, right? Which rose to something far beyond that. But yeah, we kicked that out in January, and he was charged when?
Yeah, just last month. So it took them a long time to get to that. And it raises the question because I mentioned earlier I was at one of these Christmas parties, and one of Knapp's attorneys comes up and very coy about Knapp's plans for the coming year. Apparently, there's a belief that Howie Knapp and Paige Solanich, the deputy who was implicated, there's a belief that they've got some bullets they're going to fire against those who allegedly engineered their ouster. I'm sorry, but the last time I checked, they engineered their own ouster.
Right.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But
I mean, I'm sorry.
No, please. You sounded a lot more passionate than I did.
I don't doubt, knowing how state government works, that there are some Machiavellian Game of Thrones, some people who did not want them to be at the top of that agency. But when you leave your chin hanging out that far, it's not going to be hard for somebody to knock your block off.
Yeah.
No, and after we witnessed his bond court hearing at the Alvin S. Glenn Detention Center, Howie's attorney, Joe McCulloch, I mean, he told the press that they look forward, and I'm paraphrasing, but I'm probably not too far off, that they're looking forward to a very public trial. So I can't wait to see what will come out in this trial to prove Howie's innocence, but we're here for it.
Oh yeah, we're here for it. And again, Howie Knapp is a guy that, we had a good relationship with this guy, but it's funny. He's the kind of guy you write one bad story and you're dead to him. It's like a mob thing. You're dead to him. And that's the thing. We got people, we write bad stories about. Well, let's talk about the AG for a minute. We write bad stories about him all the time. He doesn't cut us off, whine like a baby.
Well, if I could be a pedantic audio person, I would guess that you resting your hand on that microphone stand is probably causing a lot of bonking and banging noises for the audience.
God. Are we getting grief? I'm sorry.
We haven't even gotten the grief yet. I'm just
all right. You're
thinking about the grief coming into my phone here.
Okay. Well, we're going to continue to keep an eye on Howie Knapp. Obviously, he's got a case. His subordinate has a case involving this media outlet. Didn't sue us, but we are heavily mentioned in that. So eager to see what comes of that case. Jim Griffin, look forward to chatting with you soon about that one, buddy. But a lot coming out on this story moving forward. Before we switch, I want to thank Andy. You're coming in here sick, flew in from Texas, cut your vacation short to do this, man. Your commitment, just can't say enough about it, dude. Amazing year. Amazing year.
Well, I appreciate it, man. And like I said at the beginning of this segment, some of the groundwork that we have laid in 2025 that for any other outlet would have warranted several Hail Marys and hanging their hat. It's just the beginning for us here. So I can only imagine what 2026 is going to bring. I encourage everybody to stand by for what at least I hope to kick out before Chuck Wright's federal sentence, which is tentatively anticipated for February, along with his co-defendants. And as always, I extend the microphone and leave the door open for anybody and everybody who wants to talk to us about not only that convoluted vortex, but any across South Carolina. Spartanburg is one of 46 counties. And if we've learned anything about that, this crap don't end at the county line.
It sure doesn't, man. But amazing work, Andy. Amazing work. We're going to get Jen back in here as we start to address a ton of cases that made the news, criminally, true crime. One of them is another case that has some links to some big-time drug activity, Jen. And I'm referring, of course, to the David Ayler story. This was one of the hardest stories to cover. David Ayler, a friend of mine for a long time. We went back, way back, to when he was in law school in the early 2000s when I was a press secretary in the office of Governor Mark Sanford. But this is a guy I knew very well, close friend, who went on to found a legal empire in the Low Country, had one of the biggest, most successful law firms in the Charleston area. But he was found dead on January 2nd of 2023. And we reported exclusively that it was a fentanyl overdose that has since been confirmed. And this year, there was finally, at long last, some accountability, an arrest in connection with the fentanyl that killed David Ayler. But it wasn't some rando. It wasn't somebody that just kind of came out of nowhere. It was his right-hand man and his cousin, Levi Miles. Jen, you reported on this case. Walk us through the details of the David Ayler.
Yeah, David Ayler's death, I did not know David Ayler. But I knew within minutes of you reporting on his death that he was loved. He was a big personality. He had built a law firm, like you said, was a legal empire. So it was a very sad death. But as the details continued to kind of come out during the investigation of his death, it got more and more interesting. For example, one of the first people on the scene to talk to police investigating was former Circuit Court Judge Bentley Price. And it just a lot of things that made you think that, determining that it was an overdose was not going to be the end of the story. And it took a while. And that was one of the stories that I think we got the most questions on. Like, where is that story going? What is the status of it? Over the past, it's been 2 years almost. So when we did
3 years.
Yeah. So when we did, wow, holy cow.
Yeah.
So when we did see that federal indictment come through for Levi Miles, it was a heartbreaking update. And it still makes you wonder if it's the end of the story. So he was charged with distributing the drugs that caused David Ayler's death. And as I was, I knew that he was his cousin. He was the investigator at his law firm. But, as I was looking at the two of them, they
were mixed up in some
like,
stuff.
Well, yeah, but they were like brothers.
Yeah.
So, really, it was just, it's sad. You see pictures of them in high school together.
But they were mixed up in some stuff. And they were rolling and sitting with some dangerous people.
They were. And David Ayler, his practice focused heavily on criminal defense. He took on a lot of federal drug cases. And in one of the cases, shortly before his death, he was representing a defendant out of North Charleston who was accused of trafficking drugs with a gang in North Charleston. And what was interesting about that is there was a motion filed in federal court. It's called a rule to show cause, alleging that David Ayler or someone at his firm had leaked confidential witness information to their defendant and left it with them, and it got back to the other defendants. It caused threats to be taken out on these confidential informants. There was a threat on a U.S. attorney.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a big deal. And, that rule to show cause was basically asking the federal courts to find him in contempt. That resolved 2 weeks, December of 2022, before his death. So when I started looking at those defendants, there were a lot of connections. The drug trafficking in the Low Country is like nothing I have ever seen. It is all interconnected. One of the defendants had a relative that worked in the Charleston Detention Center.
Oh, wow.
A close relative, and I'll be reporting on that soon, but they were fired from that role shortly after the information was leaked.
And his phone has become a real kind of
hot potato
linchpin, right, in this investigation, because when David Ayler passed away, once a fentanyl connection was established, that's the magic word for the feds. They came in hot and heavy. That phone ended up going to the federal office up there in Florence, South Carolina. And there was a huge back and forth over who was going to be the special master to make sure that attorney-client communications were safeguarded. But that phone, a lot of folks in Charleston were very nervous about what was on that phone. They wanted it back in the local cops' hands, thinking that they could have a little more sway over how the investigation unfolded. But the feds continue to look into many avenues related to the David Ayler case. And you mentioned the name Bentley Price a moment ago, the former circuit court judge. Ayler was involved in a lot of cases with him.
A lot.
And there were some very questionable decisions, not only with Ayler, but other attorneys linked to Ayler who have since landed in hot water. So there's a lot here, but keeping it focused on the Levi Miles component, he's obviously going to be sentenced on the 9th, I believe. Is that when that's going down?
That's his
plea hearing.
Yeah, that'll be when he goes in and pleads guilty in front of the judge. The judge looks at that plea, makes sure he understands everything, and accepts it. And then what they will do is they will set it up for sentencing, which is usually 60 to 90 days. I think I have that timeline right. So they'll come back and sentence him after that.
Right. So we're looking at that story continuing to unfold starting just this coming month.
Yeah, I think that's January 9th, when his hearing is.
And so that investigation clearly still ongoing, a lot of threads to pull, and we're going to continue to dig into it, not only into those broader drug connections, but also what else was in that phone.
Right.
And what potential judicial corruption, which was so prevalent in the Murdaugh saga, is that also going to be an angle to explore in the Ayler thing? It's going to be a fascinating year on that story. Jen, another massive story that we covered, started in the spring of 2024, became a national, we're jumped ahead there, a massive story involving Micah Francis Miller.
Right.
The aspiring missionary worship leader at Solid Rock Church in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, the estranged wife, although nobody knew it at the time, the estranged wife of Pastor John Paul Miller. And John Paul Miller's case finally came to a head just this month when he was indicted by the feds, 2 counts. And both of those counts are tied to the coercive control and harassment of his late wife. The prosecutors are alleging led her to take her own life.
Correct.
And this has been a fascinating case because it has unfolded in civil court. It has unfolded criminally with this federal investigation into John Paul Miller. It's also unfolded in our state legislature as there are now bills that have been introduced to redefine coercive control and domestic abuse. And so this has been just such a huge story. But looking at John Paul Miller, it all started with that video when literally the day after, not even 24 hours after she died, when he made this crazy announcement to his congregation. Let's listen to it, Dylan.
We're not going to do an altar call today. Instead, I'm going to have you stand up and I'm going to make an announcement. And after the announcement, I'm going to ask that you leave church quietly and don't talk about the announcement here in the building, please, if you can. So y'all can stand to your feet. Before I make the announcement, I also want to say that my request to you is that you will continue to come to church and serve and give for the next little bit. 'Cause I don't want to have. I'm taking a little bit of a break, and I don't want to have to worry about the church. My break may be a few days, a few weeks. I don't know. I got a call late last night. My wife has passed away. And yeah, and it was self-induced, and it was up in North Carolina. And we're gonna have a funeral for her next Sunday here at 3 p.m. And so it's all I can. Yeah, I'm just kind of going on adrenaline right now. So y'all pray for me and my kids and everybody. And she wasn't. Y'all knew that she wasn't well mentally, and that she needed her medicine that was hard to get to her. And so I'm sure there'll be more details to come, but just keep our family in your prayers. And I'm going to let Pastor Randall, my bishop, he can pray. I'll get him a microphone, he'll pray out. And if you have anything you want to share as well, I appreciate it.
Come on, let's pray.
So he drops this bomb, tells them to leave the church without talking about it. He writes this obituary for his late wife that makes it look like they've got the greatest marriage ever, that she loved him more than anything. Everything's fine. And oh, by the way, gaslighting her after death by saying, oh, y'all know she had problems.
Right.
But what wasn't revealed, Jen, and what came out in large part thanks to your dogged research on this, was the years of stalking, of alleged abuse, tire slashing, crazy stuff that first started to come out through affidavits from Micah Miller's family, but that soon became corroborated by statements from John Paul Miller's first wife, who talked about it. And it all of a sudden became just a pattern of manipulation, coercive control, literally the definition of what this new push to change South Carolina's law is about. And in fact, the federal indictment against John Paul Miller accuses him of a sustained pattern of cyberbullying, of releasing nude photos of her.
This is one of those stories where at first glance, it's like you really got to like look at the big picture and think about what he just said there. And it was that I want you to leave here without talking about it. And then you put that together with that very odd obituary that he obviously wrote for her, and things were off. And I remember going to Facebook immediately, and I connected with a lot of her close friends and her family. Ultimately, she has a very strong group of sisters.
Yeah, we interviewed one of his sisters. Absolutely.
Two of them, actually, Anna and Abby.
Yeah.
And they all painted a much different picture in conversations with me, and said, Micah had finally broken free. She was moving on with her life. This was not a woman that was in despair. Nothing about it makes sense to us. And then they started telling me about the things that Micah had described to them that she had been going through with John Paul. They were horrific. The abuse, and alleged abuse and stalking that she experienced was frightening.
Some
but
deviant sexual stuff too.
It was when his ex-wife filed a motion for emergency custody at the end of May that included an affidavit with a lot of the exact same details that her family and friends had discussed with me, that I realized that this is real. And that took off. There's been a lot of really good reporting on this story. I do think we got it started, but there's been some fabulous reporting done on this story. And I do think, I didn't know a lot about coercive control when I began reporting on this. And I've learned quite a bit. I've learned a lot about, this proposed law and the challenges that it will face. But it took a while for those charges to come through. And I think people were getting very frustrated. There's been a large Justice for Micah movement going on, people protesting outside of John Paul Miller's church every week. think people were very concerned that there wouldn't be charges. It was never a concern of mine. I knew eventually he would face some accountability for what happened to her in the year leading up to her death, years, honestly. And I also knew that this was going to be a very lengthy forensic investigation. They had to do a lot of digging into electronic devices. There have been a lot of allegations thrown around about him and how he uses those devices. So what didn't surprise me, but the lying to federal investigator charges, that charge that came, I was like, oh,
yeah,
you don't do that.
That's the second charge he's facing, and he's going to be arraigned in. This is another early January.
Yeah,
one.
second week of January. I believe it's on a Monday. We will be there. Just a reminder for people following the story, there are no cameras, no electronics allowed in federal court. We do our reporting old school. We take notes by hand and we'll come out and let you know what happens. But yeah, he will be arraigned. They will read his charges off to him, make sure he understands them, make sure he has an attorney. And
yeah, well, and he does. One of his attorneys is a guy who was involved in a huge case that we're going to talk about in just a second. Andrew Mormon is one of John Paul Miller's lawyers. We're also going to see some good work from some of the prosecutors. I believe L. Klein is one of the prosecutors, a real up-and-coming attorney in the Office of U.S. Attorney Brian Sterling. We discussed him earlier and his work on some of those horrific child sex abuse cases. His office going to the mat on this case too, so it's good to see that. Jen, John Paul Miller, we've talked about this guy. We've talked about this story. He has not helped himself at any point. And I just got to point this out for our audience who hasn't followed the story. This guy, just this year, married the woman who everyone said was his paramour, whose husband, oh, by the way, also died suspiciously.
Yeah.
In the case that is still under investigation, his death is
as far as I know, I reached out to the Horry County Coroner's Office just before Christmas to see if that investigation was still open on their end. I've not received a response. I've not heard any indication it's closed. But I do know they had sent some evidence over the video of his death over to the FBI for analysis. Don't know the status of that. But yeah, this story is one of those stories where you keep pulling back layers, and it reminds me a lot of the rock star Cheer story out of Greenville and the Cheer Incorporated podcast that we did, where, the initial reports very differently from what the public, what you're seeing on social media. So yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. And I do also want to remind people that, these two charges, I know there's a lot of allegations about financial crimes tied to John Paul Miller. The feds do superseding indictments. It could happen, depending on where this goes. It's been an interesting case to follow.
Well, we've heard a lot of reports from Myrtle Beach about finances involving John Paul Miller and what may or may not be happening with them. We're obviously going to continue to investigate that as the feds continue their work on this case, but it's just been one of the bigger stories we've ever covered. And once again, it's a story that began on FITSNews.
Yeah.
It was our reporting May 2nd of 2024, just days after Micah Francis Miller passed away, that really blew this story up. So again, like the Murdaughs, it's something that kind of started here and snowballed. And as you mentioned, a lot of people have done a lot of really good work on this. When we think about some of these other, Dana Kennedy on the Murdaugh story, she did some great work on some of these bigger drug connections. So it's definitely not just us. There's a ton of folks.
And I appreciate it when other people look into this stuff, because it's impossible with these huge stories to get everything. And the more eyes on something, it's reassuring to me.
Absolutely. Now, coming into 2025, Jen, one of the stories that we thought was going to be not quite the trial of the century, but a huge trial, one that we had prepared, devoted a ton of resources to covering, the retrial of Summerville, South Carolina jeweler Michael Colucci, who had been previously tried for the murder of his wife, Sarah Colucci. It was a mistrial, very controversial judicial proceeding, but this case was set to move forward until it wasn't.
we were ready to rock and roll. We had our forms in for coverage of the trial. We had made plans to be there in person every day. And the Friday before the trial started, I remember checking the public index because there's always a lot of pretrial motions. They come in at the last minute. And there was one that came in that I was like, we got to get a hold of the clerk of court. I know it's a weekend, but I need this motion. And it was a motion from Colucci's defense team
Quash his indictment.
to quash his indictment, and it levied some hefty allegations.
Against a familiar figure. We talked about him earlier in the show.
Sure did, against former SLED agent. He's now moved on to another role in the private sector, David Owen, who was involved in the Murdaugh trial. Basically, that he withheld evidence from the prosecution, key evidence that very much could have made a difference when presenting this case to a grand jury to get that indictment.
Yeah.
It was a fascinating hearing. There was a lot of testimony. Agent Owen
Fireworks
was
in this.
there.
Yeah.
Former
Assistant AG Megan Bergstead
was there, who was also at one point involved in the Murdaugh trial. She gave some very contentious testimony that brought a warning from the judge at one point.
That's right.
Very defensive. And at the end of it, the judge, Roger Young, quashed the indictment and told them that if they wanted to take this to trial, they would have to take everything back to a grand jury and get a whole new indictment.
Mm.
It was stunning.
Yeah.
It was absolutely heartbreaking for Sarah Lynn Colucci's family. Her daughter, I know, is a young woman now. She was young when she died. Had anxiously been awaiting this trial. I can't imagine.
And here we are almost a year later, and there's been no move to indict him again?
We don't know when they take a case to the grand jury.
Right.
Those are secret, but we have not seen a new indictment, which I think is interesting.
Well, that was a case that so many people were following. It was a huge trial when it initially happened back in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
A case that now we're going to be, if they do re-indict, we're going to be a decade from when this crime occurred, over a decade.
Yeah, a lot of people have passed away. I believe her father passed away. Her mother is still alive. The further it gets out from the crime, the more.
But as frustrating as it is, can we not say that in this case, and we give a lot of grief to a lot of judges, but can we not agree that the judge in this case, he did the right thing. He did what he had to do, even though it creates huge headaches for prosecutors, for investigators, even though it exposed investigators and prosecutors as failing. Yeah. He did what he had to do.
It is heartbreaking. I can't even imagine being the family of.
I'm making a Murdaugh parallel.
Yeah, 100%. And that will be heartbreaking for Murdaugh's family as well. For Maggie's sister, if they have to retry this case, I always think about how difficult. There was some of Paul's friends, their testimony that was very heartbreaking. And if that verdict gets overturned, they got to do that again. Play by the rules.
Yeah.
Investigating,
prosecuting, and during the trial.
Yeah, withholding evidence, that's called a Brady violation. Some states have a Brady violation registry. Right. So if a police officer or prosecutor withholds evidence from the defense, it gets put in a registry. We don't have that here. I think we should.
Yeah, no, I agree. We're a little over 2 hours in the show, folks. Appreciate everybody who is hanging in on this New Year's Eve. We're not going to stay till the ball drops, but we do have some other cases to cover. Again, it was a huge year here at FITSNews. Again, cases that we broke, cases that we tracked closely. And as we've noted throughout the show, not just those stories, but the institutions behind them and holding those institutions accountable for the justice they administered. I want to turn now to a case out of Horry County, Jen, that we still don't have a resolution for. It's a case that involves a wrongful death lawsuit filed by attorney Mark Tinsley, another guy who made his name in the Murdaugh drama. But it involves a North Carolina insurance adjuster by the name of Scott Spivey, who was shot dead in the fall of 2023 by two gunmen who have invoked the state's stand your ground law as their justification, arguing in essence that they fired their weapons in self-defense. Now, this case has taken on a life of its own. It has become incredibly political. Dylan and I, we're going to get into that in a segment here in a moment. But this is a story that has really kind of gone off the rails in recent months. It's been one that has been seized on by the podcast True Crime universe, and there's been a lot of allegations that have not really aligned with fact. But we've been covering this case very objectively for the past year or so. We've looked at every aspect of this case, and it's a case where, Jen, I got to be honest, everything I've seen up to this point about the Scott Spivey case leads me to believe that the Office of Attorney General Alan Wilson made the correct decision when Heather Weiss, a veteran prosecutor in that office, decided not to pursue criminal charges against Weldon Boyd and Kenneth Williams. Is that the other shooter?
Yep.
Decided not to pursue criminal charges against those two individuals. Based on the evidence that we've seen, that was the right call. Now, Wilson and Weiss, to their credit, they have shipped this case up to the Seventh Circuit. Barry Barnett, the solicitor up there, they've invited him to take a look at that determination. And they've said, hey, check our work. If you think charges should be filed, do it. But there's also this civil case ongoing. And you and I were in Horry County just this past month, Jen, for a big hearing on that. What's the status on the civil case, this huge stand your ground debate?
So we are, I mean, really, we're at the phase in the civil case where they're going through discovery and evidence and, playing the cards. That's what what you have to do in court. But one of the biggest thing is there were multiple witnesses who called 911 the day of that shooting. There was a, altercation between these two vehicles going up the main road in Horry County. Highway 9, leading up to Camp Swamp Road, where Scott Spivey turned off and Weldon Boyd and Kenneth Williams followed him in their truck. Those witnesses they're eyewitnesses, and they have been very leery of participating in the civil legal process because of the publicity. I do think so. The hearing where they were bringing that to the judge to determine if they could admit the 911 calls without those callers evident like in court to testify to the specifics. And the judge did not rule on that in the courtroom. But I think in the weeks after, he was encouraging the attorneys on both sides to work very hard, assuring these witnesses that he would do everything in his power to make sure that they felt safe when they gave their deposition or testified. And I do think ultimately they did at least get one of those witnesses deposed. I'm not sure if both of them were, but I do know one was. So I'm not sure if that will be that's going to be an issue for the hearing. But the hearing, Myrtle Beach News, I can't remember which station, reported the hearing has been scheduled for February 17th.
Yeah, Channel 13 there in Myrtle Beach reported that.
Right.
We're waiting on official notices from the court on that, but certainly we will be there. We were there for the preliminary.
I don't anticipate that to be a short hearing. That will likely be multiple days of testimony, but that is what the judge will hear all of the evidence and determine if that shooting was justified under the state's stand your ground law.
One, it's important because there have been so many narratives that have been put out. And in fact, there's an entire lawsuit devoted to that. Weldon Boyd, one of the shooters, has actually sued Mark Tinsley, claiming that he whipped up.
Seeking fame and, giving evidence to news media. I mean, that's still, it was just filed a couple of months ago. It's still in very early stages.
Right.
But I don't think Horry County did itself any favors in the investigation. The investigation was crap.
Yeah.
There have been multiple officers who were fired, who resigned in the aftermath of that. And
Well, they botched it completely.
Yeah, I mean, it was a crap investigation.
Completely.
But right now, based on what we have seen in this case, and we clearly haven't, we're keeping an open mind because we have not seen everything, but what we have seen in this case lends itself to being justified.
Yeah, a botched investigation can't.
Two things can be true at the
Correct.
same time.
And a botched investigation can't dictate where a bullet wound is.
Exactly.
And the bullet wound on Scott Spivey is certainly indicative of someone that was leaning over, shooting out of the rear of a vehicle, correct?
Correct. I mean,
We want to see all these photos, obviously. It'd be important.
Exactly. I mean, and that's the thing is when you go into a trial or into a pivotal hearing like this, you always go in thinking you don't know everything. Like there could be something presented that turns your perception of the case completely upside down. And I'm trying to do that with this case because I do not have all of the evidence. I was not there. And I do think that could happen in this case.
And that's one of the things I think the Attorney General has said that I think is worth noting. He has said that if there is evidence that points to a different conclusion than the one his office reached, he's open to that. And the other thing that I think is crazy is if people who think this is a political matter, let's not forget the political thing here would be for the AG to file criminal charges.
Let's just, I'll file the charges and we'll let a jury decide.
Absolutely. I mean, that would be the politically expedient thing to do. So just very interesting how it's become such a, like you said, just contentious case. Obviously, we're going to follow it to the resolution. Moving through some of these cases, I hate to go through them so quickly, but I know we're short on time. But the trial of the year, at least as far as I'm concerned, from what I witnessed up in Greenville, South Carolina this year, a story once again that we drove it. We were the ones that were kind of finding all the little details that folks had overlooked in the initial coverage. And you hate seeing it because some of these cases, Jen, mainstream media will give you the who, what, where, when, whatever, but they don't get into the why.
Right.
They really don't. And so this is the Rose Petal murder is a case that, my God, it's the most convoluted thing we've ever
I'm
covered.
going to say when they didn't get into the why on that, the why is, I don't think we know the why yet. Thank God Dylan was there covering that with me.
Let's just recap, set the stage. A 41-year-old vet tech named Christina Parcell found stabbed to death brutally in her home in Canebrake. That's a neighborhood in Greer, South Carolina. The person who found her fiance, a gentleman by the name of Bradley Post, and I use that term very loosely because during the course of the investigation, Bradley Post was found to be in possession of multiple files of, guess what? Child sex abuse material. We said it was everywhere. It was in this case. And not only that, there were allegations that the victim participated in some of that behavior and that the victim, her own daughter. Well, the father of that young girl, a gentleman by the name of John Mill, again, I'm going to use that term loosely because we're going to get into some allegations in a moment, allegedly conspired to have her killed. And his weapon of choice, a classically trained concert pianist and former military man, Zach Hughes, one of the more unlikely defendants we have ever seen in a capital case, but prosecuted by the 13th Circuit. This case, which was tried in February this year, just one of the most bizarre trials we've ever covered. Dylan, you and Jen were there. Dylan, give us your thoughts on the Rose Petal trial.
I had unique insight and perspective into this because throughout the trial, I was communicating with John Mello and his story was changing, as we talked to him. We were up there with Troy Stiles in Greenville, and he agreed to sit down with us. And we, of course, were pressing him. Did you have anything to do with this? Did you have anything to do with this? And, he was insistent that something needed to be done, but no, I had nothing to do with it. Well, we're sitting there in court as Zachary Hughes is on the stand, and the judge had issued an order that the live video be delayed. It was about half an hour or something.
Yeah, half an hour delay.
And Zachary Hughes says, John Mello told me to do this.
Yeah.
And I said, texted John, said, Zach just said you did this. What do you say to that? And of course, as soon as Zach said that on the stand, the deputies were waiting outside of John's house and went and arrested
I
him. So I never
remember
got a
like
response.
when he said that in court, all of the deputies that were in court, like get up and leave the courtroom.
Yeah.
And we were like,
yeah, we got a warrant to serve.
Yeah.
We got to go.
Well, and we knew it was leading there because there had been these hundreds of WhatsApp messages that the two of them had exchanged. And there were some very cryptic messages between the two of them the day of the murder, which seemed to point to, like they were talking in code with each other.
Right. How did the music research go? John Mello to Zachary Hughes. Good. He replies, good. I'll tell you about it over the phone.
And so we thought this was where it was heading, but to hear him admit that on the stand, but the motive for it though, and Dylan, talk a little bit about this because you were there. This entire trial was kind of like whack-a-mole because Zach Hughes and his lawyers desperately wanted jurors to hear why. Why would Zach Hughes, this classically trained pianist, why would he commit this savage murder? According to him, he did it because this young girl was being sexually abused and he was going to put a stop to it, which again,
and this was something which the judge forbid from coming into the trial. But when you're on trial for your life, I mean, what are you going to be really worried about getting 30 days for contempt of court? Of course, that's not something that Zach's concerned with. So he's blurting this stuff out. But in my estimation, he came off as like a shark-eyed psycho. And I mean, to stab somebody like that, you have to be.
It was first of all, you do not often see defendants take the stand. And I saw it in Alec Murdaugh, and I saw it in
they both came off like shark-eyed psychos.
They did, and it was. I spoke to one of the jurors afterward. Was very off-putting to the jury. I mean, it was very robotic almost.
Right. It
was so bizarre. But then, he would try to get in something like, I did it because, I knew that Christina Parcell was, endangering this child with CSAM material, and the judge would shut it down.
But those jurors knew something else was happening.
The jurors, I mean,
did they know what it was, Jen?
How would they not?
I mean, obviously, you've got to take this guy who's coming up here and admitting that he murdered a woman at his word when you've got the prosecutors.
The first witness they bring out is Bradley Post in his prison, his jail detention center, orange jumpsuit, and
with no explanation why.
No,
it's just.
And he testifies about finding her body. They take him off. They did not know what the charge. They had to have a clue that there was something horrific going on there.
Yeah.
And to me, it's like, man, this seems very relevant to this case. But I also spoke with a number of attorneys who do criminal defense, and they told me that they were not at all surprised by the judge's ruling that this would not come in, and they don't think that any reasonable judge would have let it come in under South Carolina law.
Yeah. And there's an appeal, Jen, you reported on it, was filed just this month.
Yeah.
Several delays, but a very exhaustive appeal from Zach Hughes attorneys, one of whom now represented JP Miller.
Smallest state ever.
South Carolina is the smallest state ever.
Be nice to people because it's going to come back to you quick if you're not.
The rose petal, I mean, this case is far from over. I mean, John Mello, who was arrested the day Zach Hughes testified, is still sitting in Greenville County Detention Center. He has not even had his first hearing.
No.
That I'm aware of. Bradley Post has a laundry list of charges. He's being prosecuted by the state attorney general. There have been no updates in his cases. I mean, it's been.
And by the way, I've been in communication with John since he was charged. He was sitting in the Greenville County Detention Center, and usually Sunday afternoons he would give me phone calls, and my number alongside it seems like everybody else's number that he was communicating with has been blocked by the folks at the detention center. So I have received a piece of mail from him, but that's the only way that I've communicated with him since then. But he is adamant that he's going to walk on these charges, but he was also adamant that he wouldn't be charged. So take that for what it's worth.
So we've got a co-conspirator to the murder facing trial. We've got the child porn producer, allegedly, or possessor, who was the fiance of the victim, awaiting trial. And then we've got the appeal for the murderer. the admitted murderer,
Right.
Zach Hughes. So wow, just a
And I think it's worth noting that Solicitor Walt Wilkins, who prosecuted the case against Zach, is no longer the solicitor.
That's true.
And we asked the new solicitor, Cindy Crick, for updates on these cases shortly after she took office. And her response, paraphrasing, was, I'm dealing with a heavy caseload here, getting my arms around it.
If you're not familiar with South Carolina, Greenville is huge.
Right.
We're talking, it was
yeah, it's the largest county in
Yeah.
South Carolina in terms of population.
yeah,
Absolutely.
she's dealing with a heavy caseload. So I'm sure she's still catching up, but
Yeah.
But
Cindy
we do need to
Crick.
check back in with her as 2026 rolls around. She's now had months to get her arms around.
well,
three
and they
massive
will
cases.
have to file their response to the appeal soon.
That's
so,
correct. She's
Although I do
also
believe that Wilson's office deals with PCR, post-conviction relief.
she's also running
I'm not
for
sure.
re-election up there in
Yeah.
the 13th Circuit. So we're going to keep an eye on that dynamic. I will say this: it's an interesting segue into our next topic because to me, the Rose Petal murder trial, the investigation, the prosecution, it's one that, again, there's some questions, but it seems like everybody got it right as far as the investigation, as far as the prosecution, as far as the adjudication. Certainly there's some questions about whether or not Zach Hughes should have been allowed to say why, whatever. But a lot of the other cases that we've talked about today on this show, it's not been the case.
Yeah.
There's been corruption, there's been incompetence, and as we've said on far too many occasions, there's been a whitewashing and a desire to just bury it and just move on, forget, justice, true justice. But this year has been remarkable in terms of the public outcry. And I don't know if it's the stories that we're covering or just sort of the broader corruption that's been an epidemic in the state for so long. But the movement for judicial reform in South Carolina has never been stronger than it is right now. And I wanted to just talk about that briefly because we've got three big areas that we're going to be focused on in 2026 as this issue continues to dominate at the South Carolina State House. I'm talking about the tort debate, the debate over our lawsuit laws, which have been driving up cost and prices. There's a tort tax, $3,000 a person here in South Carolina. That's how much you're paying because of these lawsuits. Again, but not just that, we've also got the debate over judicial selection, where these lawyer legislators for decades have been picking the people that they go argue cases in front of. We've also got powerful lawmakers, as you've exposed, Jen, in your series on our state's corrupt asbestos racket, I call it. It's not a docket, it's a racket. But the most powerful politician in the state making millions of dollars.
It's a racket.
All right, folks, we're back. Apologize for the technical difficulties there. I'm still with Jen Wood, our research director, as we've been discussing the issue of judicial reform in South Carolina. And Jen, I want to pivot to the real drivers of this movement. And those are the folks who have been victimized by violent crime here in South Carolina, particularly a gentleman that we've had the pleasure to meet. He sat right outside this studio and then came in with you to do an exclusive interview before he became a famous voice for reform. I'm talking about Stephen Federico, the father of the late Logan Federico. Tell us about this man and his mission, Jen.
Oh gosh, Steve Federico, probably one of the strongest people I have ever met. His daughter Logan was murdered in Columbia, South Carolina in early May of this year. Beautiful young. When I look at Logan, I think of my daughter, who is a college student. She was down there visiting friends. And an intruder walked into the house in the middle of the night and shot her in the chest with a shotgun. It's just a horrific crime. But
tell us about his record.
In the aftermath, the person who was arrested, Alexander Dickey, Steve Federico found out he had been arrested 39 times prior. This is a young man. I think he's 33. He's only 11 years older than Logan was. And he was one of those defendants who would go in and get released early, would get his charges pled down. But the real problem was in Lexington County. So every time you are served a warrant or booked on a crime, so if you are in the detention center, for being arrested on one crime, and they take the opportunity to serve you with a warrant on another crime, you have to
Which happens a lot.
It happens a lot because, I mean,
particularly for
perfect opportunity.
career criminals. Happens a lot for career criminals.
You have to take their fingerprints because their fingerprints are what flag those crimes in NCIC, which is the police database, which goes nationally. It is what, SLED uses, their catch database. That did not happen for Alexander Dickey. So when he went to court, he was able to plead his charges down. They did not see all of his charges. It was a horrific chain of errors. And Steve,
and pointless in this age of technology where everything is so
easy. And I am trying very hard to work with what we can do.
Yeah.
Because they go out and they train these departments and they have compliance reports. But clearly it's not working because Alexander Dickey is not the only person. But Steve, just weeks. In the press conference announcing Dickey's arrest, he spoke. And I remember, I'm not a very emotional person, but I remember it made me cry. And when he came into the studio, in the weeks and months after her death, he started speaking out and he kept speaking out. And when people weren't listening, he got louder until there was
he was sick of not being listened to.
Yeah. And there was a House Judiciary Subcommittee meeting in Charlotte. And when he spoke, people listened. Do you mind throwing to this?
Let's listen to the man.
When I tell you this story, think about your kids. Think about your child coming home from a night out with their friends, laying down, going to sleep, feeling somebody come in the room and wake them and drag her out of bed, naked, forced on her knees with her hands over her head, begging for her life, begging for her hero, her father, me, that couldn't be there. She was 5'3". She weighed 115 pounds. Bang! Dead. Gone. Why? Because Alexander Devontae Dickey, who was arrested 39 goddamn times, 25 felonies, was on the street. How about that? How good are we doing for our family? How good are you doing for your kids? He should have been in jail for over 140 years for all the crimes he committed. You know how much time he spent in prison? A little over 600 days in 10 years. He's only 30 years old. He was committing 2.65 crimes a year since he was 15 years old, but nobody could figure out that he couldn't be rehabilitated. Well, you'd have to put him in prison to see if he could be rehabilitated. Isn't that the idea of prison? But no, my daughter wanted to be a teacher. She finally figured it out 2 weeks before she was executed. And I haven't heard a damn word from Byron Gibson in South Carolina. Not one word. 4 months, no communication.
Yeah. That's it. That's what's wrong. That's what's wrong.
The breakdown in the system. But so much credit to him because when people weren't listening, he got louder.
Yeah.
And I've not seen the momentum towards judicial reform like this ever.
You're right. No, it has been a phenomenon to behold. And we're going to bring Dylan in here to talk about how it's been impacting the political process. Jen, amazing work. Amazing work. Dylan, we've covered a lot of political issues since you joined FITSNews 4 years ago. Covered a lot of stories, a lot of tax issues, a lot of education issues, a lot of infrastructure issues. We hadn't made much progress in South Carolina on any of these damn issues, unfortunately. But we covered a lot of them. But have you ever seen a groundswell the way that we've seen people latching onto this judicial reform issue? Have you ever seen an issue that has galvanized people like this?
No, and I mean, I think it's because it impacts everybody. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat, if you're a Republican, and I mean, infrastructure does as well. But there's nothing that has the same heartbreak as losing a member of your family to something that's utterly preventable. I mean, look at Mr. Federico, as he very clearly articulated, the person who took his daughter from him should have been in the South Carolina Department of Corrections on a number of occasions.
For decades.
And,
Absolutely.
I don't get the idea talking to him that he's a partisan of either party, but he's a man on a mission.
He is. Another man on a mission, who is a guy who's had some conversations with Steve Federico, is Rom Reddy. And we're going to talk about him in this segment as we get into the political landscape in South Carolina, because Rom Reddy and Doge SC, they are pushing this judicial reform legislation in the Palmetto State's General Assembly. They've got bills introduced in both the House and the state Senate. Numerous sponsors, particularly on the House side. A ton of legislative support for this that would totally reshape the way that judges are selected in South Carolina. Now, is it this kind of solution that we've been talking about at FITSNews for a while? Some constitutional reform? Not quite there yet, but it would be a significant step toward wresting some of that legislative control over the judges. Dylan, your thoughts on where this bill's headed?
It certainly seems like Mr. Reddy has, before the legislators have even come back to Columbia, done the work to secure significant support for about as significant of change as you can make, as you say, short of amending the Constitution, which, as it is written right now, requires there to be this Judicial Merits Election Commission, which is what allows basically a pre-screening by a small group of both lawyer legislators and the most powerful attorneys in the state who don't sit in the legislature to basically, before it comes to a vote, before the whole body, select who the state's judges will be.
Now, Reddy, at this point, is the leader of this pro-citizen movement, Doge SC, which is, again, really driven a lot of the debate
It's outlived Doge DC.
It really has. I mean, it's been incredible to watch it. And, a lot of credit to Rom Reddy for the passion he's put into that movement. But at this moment, that is kind of his thing. He is leading this movement. He is not a political candidate. There have been some folks who have suggested
He's certainly bought a lot of television advertising for a man with no political aspirations.
That is true.
I'll put it that way.
There have been some folks who have said he should. There have been some folks who said he's thinking about doing that. At this point, no official word from Rom Reddy as to what his plans are. But of the folks who are running for governor, in fact, just this week we had a column about it. I wrote a piece about who would be the change agent in this race. And I want to start with the person who really seemed to be in control of that lane heading into this year. Somebody whose candidacy or prospective candidacy at that point was really viewed as sort of the antidote to the good old boy corruption that we've been talking about on the show. I'm referring, of course, to Nancy Mace, the 1st District Congresswoman. Dylan, it has not been a good year for Nancy Mace.
I believe she's overplayed her hand. I mean, as you say, we've been talking for more than 2 hours now, largely about how the institutions in this state need changing. And so if you can position yourself politically, whether that be running for a Senate seat, a state house seat, or the governor, if you can be that change agent, you're in a powerful position. And Nancy, having not exactly being in lockstep with a lot of the folks in Columbia, to put it mildly, actually could have been of benefit to her. But she, of course, took to the well of Congress and made a speech alleging that her ex-fiance, as well as a number of his associates, perpetrated pretty serious sexual crimes against her. And of course, this immediately gets embroiled in a legal dispute as to whether she is protected in saying this stuff from the well of Congress. But she also goes and slams the state's Attorney General, Alan Wilson, for not having taken action on this. And this is something that I don't believe that, I think these were below the belt hits, basically. He came out and said, look, this was not at the stage where I would have even made a decision to prosecute or not prosecute.
It's an ongoing investigation.
Right, it's an ongoing investigation. For folks who don't know, law enforcement does their part. They do their investigation. and then they go to the prosecutor. So it's not up to the attorney general at that early stage to pull the trigger or not.
But she benefited by a lot of the distrust that we've talked about in the
Right.
institutions here in South
Right.
Carolina. People don't trust prosecutors. They don't trust investigators. They
Rightfully
don't trust
so.
judges. So yeah, I think that she conflated a lot of things, and it was working for her until it wasn't.
Yeah, I think that people's BS detectors might have started going off. They might have started sniffing, and to me, I don't know anything about what happened with her ex-fiance or his business partners or anything. But I do know that what she's saying about Alan, just because of my knowledge of the state's judicial process, is bunk. So that makes me look at everything else that you just said in the well as, okay, well, you better bring the receipts because you've just proven yourself to not be the most credible witness.
Want to go back though 2 months to just shortly before Halloween, because Nancy Mace had really emerged through this process as somebody who, yeah, a lot of folks were questioning some of her stories, but she had not reached a point yet where it had really turned on her.
Right.
But in late October, the morning of the 30th of October, she went to the Charleston International Airport to board a flight out of Charleston. And according to incident reports filed by officers of the Charleston Regional Aviation Authority, she cursed them, she belittled them, she berated them because they weren't where they were supposed to be to escort her to her plane, allegedly. And I'm telling you, this thing just exploded. All of a sudden, her behavior, which folks have been saying for months was unhinged. Now, all of a sudden, there were people in print highlighting that. And it really backfired when she started sort of
Doubling down.
Yeah, tripling down,
quadrupling down. And I think there might be some merit to her claims that the people were not where they were supposed to be. I mean, you see her pull up to the airport and walk out of her car like you or I would without guards. And in a political environment where people who say controversial things, get their necks blown out, fair enough. I can understand her desire to have guards. But at the same time, I don't think any rational person looks at cursing out the, line level employees who were out of position as an appropriate response to that. But I think certainly people's negatives about Nancy increased after this incident. But I have my finger on the pulse pretty tightly on social media as far as what are people saying about various elected officials in South Carolina. And I noticed that even before then, Nancy just often sets herself up in her narratives as a victim. And I don't think that people are looking for a victim as a leader, certainly not in the Republican Party.
Yeah, the South Carolina GOP primary electorate is not an audience that is
frankly
receptive.
If you're like choosing to bring people into your life who are abusing you, that doesn't show that you have the greatest foresight.
Well, Mace entered this year in the catbird seat. She entered this year as someone who was ideally positioned to fill that change agent lane. Unfortunately, it seems she's been more of a chaos agent, Dylan Nolan.
And that does not appear to be what people are looking for if you believe multiple polls, which have shown her numbers slipping.
Correct. And in fact, the individual who has benefited the most from her implosion over the last year has been the very guy that she set her sights on in the beginning, Attorney General Alan Wilson. And he took some hit in the polls initially because she was leveling some very sustained criticism at him. And Dylan, it wasn't all off base. Yes, she inaccurately accused him of failing to investigate or failing to prosecute crimes that had not been fully investigated, alleged crimes. But she also hit him on some failures within his own office that we've touched on.
Things that were actually real.
Correct.
The problem is when you hit him 8 times for things that are exaggerated or bunk, the 2 times that you hit him on things that are completely legitimate, who's listening at that point?
Yeah, that's true. And Wilson ultimately weathered that wave of attacks that was launched at him by Nancy Mace the early part of the year. And he is now, according to the most recent polls, he's now in that catbird seat. He's now.
But, going into 2025, we saw things one way. Going into 2026, we see things a different way. And I think that we should emphasize there's still a lot of road ahead of us before the election day.
Yeah. And also, this is the part where people are really starting to zero in and pay attention because, as we mentioned, you talked about having your finger on the pulse of everything. That's certainly true with the Nancy Mace situation. But the thing that happened with her at the airport, that was really what kind of blew it up in public perception. So now we're heading into a part of this governor's race in South Carolina. People are paying attention now. People are really starting to focus now. Coming out of this holiday season, this is when these candidates are going to make.
This is
or
where
break.
everything's going to ramp up as we approach the last day where candidates can file, and we will know for sure what our field looks like. And we'll start to see people who I think Ralph Norman has been doing a great job of positioning himself. I just see him taking stances that I think really align with what the GOP electorate is looking for in a candidate. However, he's sitting on a lot of cash and he hasn't been spending it. Conversely,
he's a very frugal guy.
You see Pamela Evitt, who I don't know really what she stands for on the policy front, but she spent a lot of money and got a lot of reward for that. Skyrocketed herself in the polls. Now the question is really, is that a plateau, or is that something that she's able to build on? Will she have the funds to blast another round out like that as we get into prime time?
Well, we've used the term sugar high as it relates to
Right.
Pamela Evitt, because you're right. She spent a lot of money on some ads that really boosted her stature. She's, for those of you who don't know, she's the second term lieutenant governor of South Carolina. It's not a position that has a ton of visibility, and Governor Henry McMaster has not really put her front and center on any high profile issues. So she's been a
Well, there's
very,
been some friction between those two when she tried to imply an endorsement that he clearly was not ready to give her. And so I don't know what she can count on from him going forward after that.
yeah, they in fact made her pull an advertisement off television that implied an endorsement. It was actually video that was taken back in 2017. So an 8-year-old video clip of Henry McMaster. He still looked old then, didn't he, Dylan?
Well, I mean, he is. What's wrong with that?
Foghorn Leghorn, the governor of South Carolina, people, a veritable caricature. But let's talk a little bit about this race, because endorsements, you mentioned that a moment ago. The big endorsement here that everyone covets, at least as it relates to the South Carolina electorate, and obviously Donald Trump enters 2026 with a negative 10% approval rating if you judge the aggregate of the polls. So he's certainly not in the best position. But amongst South Carolina Republicans, he's still incredibly popular. His endorsement is the one that really is what everyone's coveting, at least amongst those candidates. Nancy Mace really seemed to be in a position to get it heading into this year. But Dylan, it's looking more and more like that's not in her wheelhouse anymore.
The question to me is whether Trump endorses while it still matters. I think it's altogether likely that he does something that he's done multiple times, which is wait to endorse until it's clear who's going to win. Do you think he's going to endorse while there's actually still some time left on the clock?
Well, does he endorse now at this point? Is it a race he just stays out of because there's so many contenders that are polling closely? I mean, this is going to be a dogfight for the next couple months.
And he might just enjoy letting it be a race to see who can kiss his butt the most, as they're all doing.
And we also got to find out, what does Ron Reddy do? Because here's a guy who has clearly made it abundantly evident he's willing to drop money. Does he do that in support of his own candidacy? We'll have to see. He, to me, is the real wild card, Dylan. Ron Reddy. I think that guy, what he decides to do is going to really impact this race in a huge way. If he jumps in, he may not win, but shaping that race, driving the debate, holding these other candidates accountable to, again, what we talked about earlier is, what does the Republican primary electorate want? And in South Carolina, we may want competitive elections, folks. We may want for there to be, a viable choice in November at the ballot box, but in the Palmetto State, there isn't. Democrats here, Dylan, they're irrelevant. They haven't won a statewide race since 2006. They haven't won a top of the ticket governor's race since 1998. Aaron wasn't even alive. You weren't even alive.
Neither was I.
I mean, so this is sort of, we're getting to the point now of generational
Well, the funny thing is that half the Republicans here are Democrats, that have the R after their name. I mean, literally a lot of them switched parties back in the late 90s when it became politically hard to get elected as a Democrat here. So while they might not be running the state in name, it explains a lot of why the state operates the way it does once you understand that.
No, that's absolutely true. And in so many of the Republican candidates that we see campaign as conservatives, they tout their conservative bona fides to the Republican electorate in a primary. And then when they get in Columbia, they're voting with that uniparty more often than not, Dylan.
And another thing I want to emphasize as we talk about these primaries is that even if you are a Democrat living in South Carolina, if you want to make your voice heard, the Republican primary is the place to do it, and nothing's going to stop you. Even if you are a registered Democrat, as it stands, the state has open primaries, meaning that anybody registered or unregistered can vote in the Republican or Democrat primaries.
That's absolutely right. And that is something that a lot of the conservative wing of the GOP here in the Palmetto State is pushing hard. They want to close those primaries so that only registered Republicans are allowed to vote. But Dylan, we've got other races to look at in addition to the big governor's race. We've got a race for attorney general because the current occupant of that office, Alan Wilson, running for governor, as we just mentioned, he's the front runner. And in fact, perfect time, I think, to plug the fact that we are starting, you and me, a new political series in the coming year. Our first episode is going to be on January the 14th.
7 p.m.
7 p.m. We're going to do it live just like this. So if we screw up and drop the feed, who knows? But our first guest, the front runner, the Attorney General, Alan Wilson, is going to be here in the studio for the first edition of FITSpolitik, our new show focusing on South Carolina politics.
Yeah, I'm very excited to have him. As you say, he's sitting high on the hog as we go into 2026, looking at that gubernatorial election. And obviously, I have a personal history having started my career working in his office. So it's a real honor that he's going to be sitting down with us.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it. But the office he's vacating, multiple Republican candidates seeking that office right now. Honestly, that race, Dylan, has been every bit as focused on by the insiders here in South Carolina because honestly, that's a very powerful office.
I mean, you and I have spoken, and I've said, if you were to give me one statewide elected position in South Carolina, that's what I would take because it's actually a much more powerful position than the governor, if you think about it.
When the candidate making the most noise in that race is First Circuit Solicitor David Pascoe. We've talked a lot on this show about judicial reform. We talked about Rom Reddy and his influence in the Doge SC movement. But the candidate for Attorney General who has joined at the hip with Rom Reddy on that judicial reform push, who in fact was pushing for it for years, David Pascoe, and he has really seized that mantle. His problem is up until this year, he was a Democrat. We talked about it a moment ago, how these guys switch parties, change labels. How can David Pascoe win a statewide race, having just last year been a member of the other party?
It's interesting because I think that most people that attend GOP meetings regularly would not know that David Pascoe is a Democrat. And I say that because this man has hit, I want to say every GOP meeting in the state, but a lot of the counties, and certainly all of the populous counties, he has gone multiple times and done judicial reform presentations too. And this is before he switched parties. He knew that the Republicans are the people to whom you need to appeal if you would like to get things done in South Carolina. So while, Republican Senator Stephen Goldfinch, who's running, he has been a Republican throughout his career, but how many people actually know who he is throughout the state? Now, that being said, the South Carolina GOP will most certainly back an establishment Republican and throw the full weight of, conservative ink behind that person. So whomever the highest on the hog, normie GOP candidate is, they're going to get the full party push. So David's going to be facing some extreme headwinds and they're going to make hay with his past.
They are certainly. And the other thing, there is a very credible Republican solicitor from the upstate region, David Stumbo, the 8th Circuit solicitor. He's running in this race as well. But the wild card here, we talked about Rom Reddy being a wild card in the governor's race. The wild card in the AG's race is the son of the current governor, Henry McMaster Jr. Now, a lot of folks are speculating that McMaster Jr. is going to jump into this race at the last minute, benefiting from his name ID, the massive fundraising that his dad and others could generate on his behalf, and rumors that his father is holding out for a Trump endorsement, not for anybody on the governor's race, but for his son as Attorney General, which would obviously, you put those three things together, Dylan, instant front runner.
Right. And I have to say the guy's a gentleman. Obviously, you have said a lot of things about his father, which are maybe not the nicest. And so when we ran into him on the street outside of the Palmetto Club about, 2 years ago now, I guess, and he was unsparingly kind to you, I have to say I was glad that I wasn't breaking up a fist fight there.
No, he's a nice guy. You hear a lot about people and then you meet him and, he's a nice guy. Also well regarded as an attorney. He's a hospitality lawyer.
Certainly.
At a firm here in Columbia, South Carolina. Now, is he experienced? Would that lack of experience be something that his rivals could seize on? I think so.
He's going to be in a race with people who have a lot of prosecutorial experience with any of these other candidates.
No, there's no doubt about it. So we got the governor's race, we got the attorney general's race, but we've also got a massive fight for control of the entity that really wields the power in South Carolina. And we've talked so much on this show about the corruption in the system. We've talked so much about the judicial corruption. But in South Carolina, that ultimately flows back to the legislative branch of government because they run the courts. It's not the judicial branch in charge of itself, folks. In South Carolina, it is the legislative branch that runs the judiciary. And every single member of the South Carolina House of Representatives is up for election, Dylan, this year, 2026. Now, that hasn't always meant that there have been competitive elections because, as we've seen, the way they draw these districts, a lot of times people don't even challenge the incumbents. Or if they do, they're not credible challenges. Or if they do, they're not even in the primary election where you can actually make a difference. By the time we get to November, people are like, wait a minute, why is this guy the only guy on the ballot? So what do we see this time, though? We see more candidates running. We see a real rift within the ruling GOP. How do you see the 2026 General Assembly race unfolding?
I mean, I think that to address this, we have to go back to RJ May, because the insurgency of which you speak, the Freedom Caucus, basically running to the right of these, a lot of former Democrats who leave this big wide lane open to run to the right of them in a state that is far more conservative in its primary electorate than it is in how it is governed. There is that big lane there. And I do think that in the last session, we saw House leadership try to get some big conservative wins that they can tout so that in this cycle, their opponents to the right do not have a lot of ammunition. That being said, RJ May being taken off the board, as we've just seen in multiple special elections, did nothing to change these primary voters' desire to have people run to the right of the mainstream, to be the change agent, which we were just speaking about, that Nancy could have been operating from a position of power as a change agent. Well, she blew that opportunity, in my opinion. But that does not mean that people aren't looking for change agents in the AG's race, in their local House and Senate races. And I think that anybody who can leverage that, whether they're going to leverage it saying, I'm going to be in the South Carolina Freedom Caucus, which if you notice, these change agent candidates who won in these special elections have not committed to the Freedom Caucus.
Yeah.
So it's not like that is necessarily even going to be the vehicle, but the idea of running to the right of the SCGOP House, leadership or Senate leadership, that is far from dead.
Yeah, and the elections Dylan's referencing, for those of you who haven't been following, there were 4 special elections for seats in the South Carolina General Assembly this year due to resignations, due to other things. So we got
imprisonments
and indictments. We got a sneak peek at 4 of those races this year. And as Dylan mentioned, the Republican establishment, their candidates lost all of those races. So the conservative wing of the Republican Party, at least in these 4 elections that we've seen, really on the upswing. They've got the wind at their back, all the momentum. So that presents a huge challenge to the status quo forces of people like Speaker Merle Smith, who, by the way, is the guy we mentioned, the most powerful lawmaker, getting all the money from that asbestos docket Jen Wood was talking about. Well, that's Merle Smith.
Right.
That's Merle Smith.
The kingpin.
The kingpin. And so, yeah, it'll be interesting, Dylan, because RJ May and his collapse, a lot of people thought that was going to be the death knell for the Freedom Caucus and for these conservative Republican candidates. It's been the opposite.
I don't know. You say it's the opposite. I actually disagree because I was speaking to members of the Freedom Caucus throughout the session, and they were telling me that their ability internally to get things done basically was dramatically negatively impacted. They cited both RJ May, who obviously was taken off the board because of his self-admitted criminality, and Adam Morgan, who ran for a U.S. House seat, lost, and I believe that he has a political future ahead of him, but I don't know exactly what that looks like. But both of them not being in the General Assembly, I think those 2 guys, speaking to people who were in office with them, were people who would come and whip, which whipping means lining up votes, getting everybody on the same page. And I don't know that they have somebody who's half as effective. And this, no offense to Jordan Pace, who's leading the organization. I just think his skill set lies in different areas than RJ's or Adams did. But regardless of whether they have that effective leadership within the body when they are there legislating, the desire among the electorate is clearly still there. So they're going to be seemingly receiving replenishments and new members. what will they be able to effectively leverage that to pass any legislation themselves? I think they're going to continue receiving the treatment which they are receiving now, which is being assigned to crap committees, to not having their bills being advanced at all, unless it's, they're smart enough to attach it to somebody else who is not on the blacklist. So I don't know. Will they get any bills passed this session? I wouldn't hold my breath, but will they have all the wind taken out of their sails? Clearly, they have not.
Yeah. Ton of races to follow this year, folks. And again, to follow them, to get all the inside info, make sure you tune in to our newest show, Fits Politic. It's going to launch the 14th of January, this coming month, with the first guest being the front runner in the race for governor of South Carolina, Alan Wilson, the current attorney general. Can't wait to reveal the future guests we're going to have on that show too. Dylan, really exciting. You're going to be in on that, man. We're going to have you not only just behind the camera, you're going to be actively part of those conversations, man. I love it. I love it.
Yeah, it's going to be great.
So big political year coming up, but I want to get Jen Wood in here. Before we go real quick, I want to thank everybody for hanging with us on a super long year in review live. Just so much stuff to cover. Again, a huge year of news for Fitz here in 2025. But as we head into the new year, tons of big cases coming up. And we've talked already about hearings related to some of these still unresolved stories that we've been covering. And as we head into 2026, there are new stories that we're going to be covering also. Jen, walk us through a few of these, starting up in the upstate, a quadruple homicide.
Anderson County, Amy and Ross Velarde were indicted, I think last year. But it was for the 2017 murder of her mother, stepfather, grandmother. I mean, it's a horrific crime. It went unsolved for many, many years, and they just recently indicted them. That's going to trial where we've been told February 23rd it will begin. That will be interesting because attorney Lori Murray is representing
Lawyer Laurie, we love her.
Laurie on TikTok is representing, I believe, Amy, and Sean Kent, an attorney who, if you're familiar with FITSNews, are probably.
He needs no introduction.
In 2026, we really ought to get both of them in this studio.
Oh, man,
We got to.
Oh my gosh, Sean Kent. He cracks me up. But he's representing Ross. So it is, I mean, in addition to the Attorney General's office prosecuting, Heather Weiss, I can't remember co-counsel on that. It was Kinley.
Well, they just lost one. Kinley Aby's no longer with the AG.
But yeah, so that'll be late February from what we're told. The AG's office has until 30 days before the trial begins to announce if they will be seeking the death penalty. There's been no indication either way if they are, but I mean, it is a horrific crime. We're also looking at the recent case up in Lancaster, I gotta say it right, South Carolina, where the pastor's son was holding a bunch of
people prisoner in his basement, basically.
Vulnerable adults.
Vulnerable adults. Thank you. I couldn't.
And I
remember.
recently attended a hearing for that, and prosecutors alleged that these people were withered down to skin and bones in his custody. What was perhaps most remarkable to me about that proceeding was how many members of his family, and I say this with confidence because they, bear a striking resemblance to him, there were in support.
Yeah.
And I spoke briefly with a couple of them who, they asked me not to attribute things to them, so I won't. But they truly believe in his innocence. Now, I don't know, given the overwhelming amount of facts which prosecutors brought to bear, and which they clearly have, extensive documentation of, I don't really know where they're coming from on that. But it is, it's a case where we have a lot of that proceeding put up on YouTube. I did cut out some of the, extraneous remarks that are procedural in nature and kind of cut it down to just the facts of the case. But that is something worth tracking. It's a truly eye-opening case.
Yeah, very. It's horrific. I mean, and then we also have up in Anderson County as well, Brandon Barnes, who was charged with the murder of his young wife, Jessica Barnes, along with two co-conspirators, Kendall Mims and Victoria Tippett. That
That's a heartbreaking case.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. I would be shocked if that didn't go to trial sometime this year, but we don't have any dates finalized or anything yet.
This was a guy living in a pool house owned by one of Mim's family members.
Her grandfather.
Three women in the pool house. Obviously, 3 of them charged with the murder of his late wife. Just a horrific story.
For dismembering and disposing of the body.
Awful.
And, this is a case where obviously Brandon's role in this, should prosecutors prove what they allege, is heinous, but also the young women who are his alleged co-conspirators, you can't help but feel that they were young and naive and had no clue what the heck they were getting into, being around an individual like that. And should prosecutors prove what they allege, they obviously need to do their time for their role in this. But at the same time, it's just heartbreaking to see people who, if they never associated with somebody like that, they seem highly unlikely to ever do anything violent in their lives.
There was
get pulled into that.
Yeah, I spoke with Kendall Mim's family in detail. I believe all the years are running together, but yeah, I think there's a lot of allegations of coercive control, a lot of questions about abuse, physical and mental abuse of the young women in that home, not just Jessica. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. There are some very good defense attorneys involved in that, and I've been following it very closely.
Yeah, we've also got Chuck Wright sentencing coming up. We've got the broader investigation that you guys are still doing on Chuck Wright and those associated cases.
Tips are still coming in real time.
We've got that broader Murdaugh drug connection investigation.
Andrew Fincher left the studio to go collect some more information about the case. It sounded like he was
That's
working
right.
the
We're gonna
phones.
have we're gonna have a fun weekend. That's all I'm
New
gonna
Year's
say.
Eve, he's working the phones, people.
And the Murdaugh story continuing with the big appeal hearing before the state Supreme Court. Will at some point this coming year get a determination on whether or not he gets a new trial.
At the state level, at least.
At the state level, certainly, and then those broader drug connections. And for those of you who are new to FITSNews, if this was the first year you started following us, I hope this show has shown you just the breadth and depth of what we cover. Not only the range of stories, but how deep we get into them, and how we not only cover these cases, but the institutions surrounding them. So important, again, to that broader theme of accountability. That is why we're here, again, to hold those institutions accountable, even when it's inconvenient or when intimidation is a byproduct of it. But I can't thank this team enough. Erin Parrott, you're going to get to know her in the new year.
She's been doing a great job here on the tech tonight.
Erin is the newest member of our team. Cannot wait to get you introduced to her more over the coming year. She's done amazing work with us, not just behind the scenes, but in the coverage at FITSNews.com. Erin, Andy, Jen, Dylan, it has been an honor to work with you guys this year. You guys have kicked ass. You've took names. Andy taking scalps. But I'm telling you, it's been an honor to work with you guys. And for those of you who want to support our work, please go to FITSNews.com. Subscribe to our site. As Andy said, $10.99 a month. Your subscriptions are what empower everything that we do here. All the accountability that we are hoping to bring, again, to these systems. It is your support that lets us do it. So if you haven't already, please subscribe to FITSNews.com. It's been an amazing year. Can't wait to see what we're covering a year from now as we sit down on New Year's Eve for another year in review. But I want to thank everybody who joined us tonight for an extended edition of the Year in Review on FITSNews. And we will catch you in 2026.